Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's meeting of the Assembly Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Will the Secretary please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Brown May. Assemblyman Carter.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Gallant.
Here.
Assemblyman Gurr.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Present.
Assemblywoman Peters.
Here.
Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong. Chair Watts.
I am here. Thank you. Please mark Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong present when she arrives. Members, we do have a few items on our agenda for today. We'll be hearing presentations from the RTC of Southern Nevada as well as the RTC of Washoe County. And then we'll be hearing two bills, AB 144 and AB 161. I do intend to take the agenda in order. Before we get started, a few housekeeping notes, please, everyone. And it's nice to see a packed committee room today. Please be sure to silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to our committee secretary if you have one. Anyone wishing to provide testimony or public comment via phone can find the information to do so on our agendas, which are posted on the legislature's website. We'll ask anyone providing public comment to limit their remarks to 2 minutes. And with that, we will move into our agenda for today. First up, we will have a presentation from the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. Thank you for joining us today. Whenever you are ready, you can introduce yourselves for the record and begin.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Vice Chair Brown May, and thank you, members of the committee. My name is MJ Maynard. I'm here on behalf of the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. With me also is RTC's Chairman and Clark County Commissioner Justin Jones. So thank you for the opportunity to present. As Eileen, the great, gets us started. Okay, So, you know, the fundamental role of the RTC is to connect people, and I think people are always surprised to learn that we are the only agency in the United States to house all of these functions under one roof. We are the public transit provider, we are the metropolitan planning organization, we are the roadway funding agency for the region, the traffic manager for the region, and we oversee the bike share system in downtown Las Vegas. As many of you know, roadways in Southern Nevada are primarily funded by motor vehicle fuel taxes, including fuel revenue indexing, otherwise known as FRI. And thanks to the Nevada Legislature, in large part, fuel revenue indexing became something that we could do in 2014. In 2016, because of a successful ballot question in Southern Nevada, we were allowed to continue to index fuel tax to inflation. It's been a very successful program, allowing us to work closely with all the local jurisdictions, contractors, labor, et cetera, to ensure that we have funding to not only maintain and operate the roadways in Southern Nevada today, but to grow the roadway infrastructure for the future. And so what have we done with this money? If you look here on this slide, 614 contracts have been awarded, of which 336 have been completed. 78 local small businesses have been put to work. Over $2 billion has been spent on roadway infrastructure, and over 15,000 jobs have been created. So the intent of today's presentation is to focus mainly on the hat that we wear as a transit provider. The funding challenges that we've had, this is not a funding challenge that just appeared this year. We've actually spent time in previous legislative sessions, including 2017, 2019, and 2020, to talk about the fiscal cliff in our transit fund that we knew was imminent. And so before I get into that, just a quick overview. This is our budgeted transit operating revenue for fiscal 2023. This is what funds public transit. The majority of that, as you see on the slide, is sales tax. About 76% we anticipate $218.5 million in sales tax this year. And then budgeted transit operating expenditures for fiscal year 2023. The majority of what we spend is on our contract services. That's providing the fixed route service itself, paratransit, senior services, veteran services, and the like. And that's about 87.2% of the total expenditure pot. So just real quickly, I wanted to share a quick video just that talks about the impact and the value of transit in Southern Nevada.
As we have seen the introduction of the bus route, it's opened up more resources for people to come here and choose Amazon as an employer of choice.
My work starts at 4 in the morning, so when I get up, it takes me maybe 5 minutes to walk from my home to the bus stop. It's reliable, so I only have to wait 5 minutes at the bus stop. It gets me to Flamingo and the Strip, and then it's just a short 3 or 4 minute walk to the Cosmopolitan.
I was in the Army. I ride the transit system every single day. I depend upon RTC transit system for everything I do. I could take anywhere from 2 to 3 or even 4 buses in a day. If I didn't have that, if a lot of veterans and a lot of people didn't have that, we wouldn't be able to have quality life.
I'm a ULV student and worker. I've been taking public transit since I was 12. I ride the bus about 4 or 5 times a week when school starts.
I am a physical therapist. My husband is an attorney, and we are just a family that loves the Vegas Golden Knights. And we use the public transit system to take the Golden Knights Express to the games.
If it wasn't for the buses, I would be eating up a lot of Uber fees, taxi fees, relying on anybody that can give us a ride.
I use RTC transit for getting to work and doing other things I enjoy. I get to independently move throughout the community, where before that I would have to rely on friends or family to take me places. And with paratransit, I get to choose where I want to go and when I want to go there. I use it on a daily basis to get to and from work or the grocery store, but I also have used it to be able to go down to the Strip or go down to T-Mobile Arena and watch hockey.
I take the bus downtown to meet up with friends.
That would be extremely hard if there wasn't a bus system, because that's my reliable transportation to get to work.
Go see a movie or get to the doctor.
It's important to veterans, it's important to mothers, it's important to college students, I mean, anybody.
Here we go. So but people, again, are also surprised to learn that the RTC operates the 14th busiest bus system in the United States. Pre-pandemic, we were actually ranked the 12th busiest bus system. We moved about 65 million trips that year. Coming out of the pandemic, we're not quite back to where we were. And so we're moving, in 2022, there were 41 million annual trips just on our fixed route system alone. That's 39 routes that utilize about 400 buses and stop and service about 3,300 bus stops. We had over 1 million paratransit trips. We use about 400 vehicles to operate that service as well. Another thing, I think people are surprised if you don't use transit. I think the thought might be that just poor people use transit. But we know that of the 150,000 daily boardings that happen in Southern Nevada every day, 80% of those folks using transit are going to work. And so we are connecting employees to employers. We are part of the economic ecosystem in the community. And I do, it's kind of maybe a bit of a proud moment for the agency. For the last 8 years, we've been ranked the most efficient bus system in the United States. So what does that mean? That means that we use less taxpayer subsidy per trip. And so we like to stay lean and mean. We take our role as stewards of taxpayer dollars very seriously and try to make the most of what we have. So I'll go on to just our funding challenges. And my apologies, I know this is a busy slide, but this slide represents our 10-year financial model to operate transit for the next 10 years. The dark blue bars represent revenue that we receive to operate public transit. The light blue bars represent the cost or the expenditures to operate public transit. The green fund balance, it's important to note, it looks the way that it does because we received a one-time infusion of $304 million in stimulus funds. And that allowed us a little breathing room. We can push this fiscal cliff that's imminent. We were able to push it off for a few more years. It's important to note the black line there, that is our board-approved 6-month reserve policy. That represents what we would need to have in place to operate transit for additional 6 months. This is the same slide, except this shows if we had not received the stimulus funds, this is what the funding model would look like. Oops. Okay. So if I were to add up look at the bottom line where it shows that the fiscal cliff starts, or I should say the expenditures over revenues begin in fiscal 26. If you were to take that out to fiscal 34, it's over $800 million in expenses over revenues. If you just concentrate on the first 3 years, we anticipate about $231 million of expenses exceeding revenues, and because it's such a significant number, if we're not able to identify a funding solution, we'll begin retracting service as early as fiscal 24, July of 2024. But I will tell you that we will begin making cuts internally first, as we had to do during the Great Recession, whether that was laying off staff, employee wage reductions, things like that. So we take it very seriously before we impact our community. We look internally as to what we can be to make sure we're the most efficient with taxpayer dollars. One last thing I want to note here. When you look at this model, we know that it takes, in order to maintain the current level of transit service for the next 10 years, we need about $40 million each year. And so, how did we get here? Again, it didn't happen overnight. We've known for a while that this day was approaching. We like to do our research. We looked around the United States. How do other transit systems invest? What do they invest to maintain public transit in their communities? And what we learned was in Las Vegas, the annual spend per capita is about $113. When you compare that to some of our peer cities or other cities around the United States, they spend $80 to $270 more per capita on an investment in public transit in their respective communities. And then we used to have bragging rights. Because of the world-famous Las Vegas Strip, we were the only transit system in the United States that had a profitable transit route. Unfortunately, transportation is not a moneymaker. It's a subsidized service. But we actually generated a profit every single year, and we used that profit to help stand up the service we provide to our residents of Southern Nevada. When TNCs began operating the resort quarter in October of 2015, we saw a decline beginning in both ridership and revenue, beginning in November of 2015, which has continued today. Okay, so, our job is to find, we're supposed to be problem solvers. That's what we're paid to do. And anytime we have conversations around identifying a revenue source, they're not easy conversations. But I do, I'll go over a couple of potential solutions. This leaves us with the need to secure additional revenue to sustain transit service in Southern Nevada. And we understand that any conversation around revenue is difficult, and over the last 7 years, we've explored several potential options. Most recently, we met with our RTC Board of Commissioners and the Transportation Resource Advisory Committee, or we call them TRAC. That is a committee made up of about 35 key stakeholders in Southern Nevada, so it represents the business community, the chambers of commerce, labor, education, seniors, veterans, just to name a few. And both our RTC Board of Commissioners and the TRAC Committee looked at our financial, we scrubbed the numbers. We wanted to make sure that we were getting as very transparent as we could be. And, you know, they certainly concurred that we had a significant funding problem and recommended that we continue to explore revenue options. And so one potential option that we were looking at is allocating funds from revenue that the state already collects that may more appropriately be directed to mitigate the impacts upon public transportation. For example, the transportation connection tax is currently collected for activities that have a direct impact upon public transportation. Another potential option would be for the legislature to give local governments flexibility to address the needs of our transit system at the local level. We're continuing to socialize these options. If we are unable to find a legislative solution, the last option to try to avoid service cuts and maintain existing service will likely be to seek a ballot question in 2024 to increase the sales tax. If none of these solutions are successful, then unfortunately cutting service will be our only option. So let me get through. This slide here is just an example of what that would look like. Probably about 8.5 million trips would be impacted on an annual basis. And certainly the people that will be impacted will be the workforce that relies on us to get them to work, paratransit customers, folks living in low socioeconomic conditions, carless households. That also includes many families have just one car, so they take public transit as a subsidy in terms of getting around, and of course veterans, seniors, and students. And I just wanted to mention one other thing before I end this presentation. I want to mention that our legislation, SB 17, received a hearing in Senate Government Affairs last week. This bill is essentially cleanup language to our statute, NRS Chapter 277A. This will include updates to the Yellow Dot program. Due to changes in technology and community interest, would like to make the program permissive rather than mandatory. And two, to remove requirements from the statute for the Bus Shelter and Bench Advisory Committee, such as the annual number of meetings and specific membership requirements, to allow the RTC Board of Commissioners to make changes to the committee based on the community need. And then finally, to clarification that allows us to invest in innovating and emerging transportation technologies that will better align with federal infrastructure bill policies, such as investments in battery and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses and autonomous vehicle technology. And that concludes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Ms. Maynard. Questions from committee members? Assemblywoman Summers Armstrong.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ms. Maynard, for the presentation. You said that your the dollar amount was very big, 800 and some odd. Can you please tell me how that breaks down by fiscal year?
I can. Let me get back to, I'm sorry, through you, Chair, to Assembly.
And you can go directly to the member.
All right, thank you. So if you draw your attention to fiscal year 26, the deficit begins at about negative 54.6. Fiscal 27, it's negative 75.8. Fiscal 28, it's negative 100.7. Fiscal 29 is negative 105.2. And then 113.1, a negative 17.6, negative 33 million, negative 103.7 million, and then negative 222.4 million.
Okay, but you don't, thank you for that. But you don't need it all at once. You need incremental yearly dollars. And what would that amount be?
So we looking at the numbers and looking at our capital program, the cost of new business, we think we'll need about $40 million per year to sustain the current level of transit service with some moderate growth based on population growth, so about 2% each year for the next 10 years.
Thank you. That's a much different pill to have to swallow. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair Brown May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. It's great to see you here today. Last session, I do believe we talked a little bit about first mile, last mile, and a pilot program that was being done relative to some of the paratransit and accessibility features. I know that we continue to expand development in the valley, but we don't always reach them with regard to transit services. And I'm curious to know, do you have any update information relative to the success of that pilot? Are we continuing it?
Assemblywoman Bromley, thank you very much for that question. So we do. Actually, we were able to, again, because of stimulus funds, we were able to add service to areas of the valley that had been growing for many years, and we had not been able to provide transit service, for example. So the southwest part of the valley has been one of the fastest portions of in West Henderson, the northwest part of Clark County. We didn't have the funding to expand services, and so we did introduce an on-demand service. We do that as a way, again, it's much more efficient to cover the square miles that the Southwest represents. And so they're not pilots anymore, they're now programs. We partner with Uber, we partner with Lyft, we partner with a private company in Southern Nevada called Tango. And so it's looking for the most efficient way to operate service based on the needs. Is it a sprawly community? Is it a very dense community? And what makes the most sense fiscally?
May I just chime in real fast? I live in the Southwest Valley, as you know, and I've...
Your mic, Commissioner.
Sorry about that. Should know by now.
And your name for the record.
Justin Jones, Chair, Clark County Regional Transportation Commission. I live in the Southwest Valley, and the on-demand service came on board about 18 months ago, and it's been not just a boon to the people who live in the Southwest, but also the small business owners. I can tell you that restaurant owners, tire shop owners have really taken advantage of partnerships with the RTC, so that if you blow a tire, you go to the tire shop, want to get home, get to work, you can take advantage of door-to-door service. Same thing. You go out to a bar, you need a safe ride home, then the on-demand service has been fantastic for that. And I think if we're able to have sustainable funding, that's something that we definitely would love to be able to expand through other areas of the valley.
Thank you. Thanks, Commissioner, for that information. As you all, I'm sure, already know, I'm a big bike advocate. And so some of the multimodal accessibility features that we have relative to how they interact with our transit system is really important. And so I'm curious to know if you have any updated information that perhaps you could provide even after this meeting relative to how are we doing with regard to bike share? How many bikes are we carrying on our buses? And just to see what's the accessibility and how are we able to help folks that are utilizing multiple modes of transportation.
For the record, MJ Maynard. She knows our system well. We carry over 50,000 bikes on our transit system every single month. So a lot of people use their bikes as a first mile, last mile. You're right, we are multimodal, and it really is about options for people to move about Southern Nevada, including bikes and bicycle safety. I'll make sure and get with your office to provide you updated maps, but it is still a priority for many of the jurisdictions to invest in bike lanes. We are seeing a keen interest in e-bikes. You don't have to pedal as hard. And we're looking looking for federal grant opportunities to expand the bike share system and with an emphasis on maybe more e-bikes.
Thank you. Additional questions from members of the committee? I'll just ask a couple quick ones. I'd love to hear a little bit more. We're talking about trying to preserve transit, and that's important. And you've talked about some of the innovative initiatives around first mile, last mile. Could you give us an update on? I know that Maryland Parkway corridor has been a long time priority for kind of improving the quality of transit along that corridor. Could you talk about some of the big picture projects to improve transit, understanding at the same time that we do have some issues with being able to sustain it long term?
MJ Maynard, for the record. Thank you, Chair. That's a great question. So we've been working on the Maryland Parkway Bus Rapid Transit project for quite a while, and We are depending on, and I hate to say fingers crossed, but fingers crossed that we're going to receive, we'll know sometime this spring if we're going to receive federal funding. It's the Capital Investment Grant Program. And so we're at 90% design. We should start construction in 2024. The service will be up and running by 2025. And again, a great connector for the airport, UNLV, through the downtown area, the UNLV's medical district. And so very excited about that. We've been working on an onboard plan. You know, we talk to the community. We can't make decisions without talking to the community. What would you like to see in Southern Nevada as we grow up as a mobility region? And we certainly have heard that customers would like to see more high-capacity transit. That could be light rail, bus, urban transit. They want more frequent service. They want safer service. They want upgraded amenities. And so we stand prepared to implement some of those major projects if funding becomes available. The federal government, unfortunately, unless you have a sustainable funding source, the federal government is not prone to giving out federal dollars for big projects.
Thank you for that. And on that piece of federal funding, could you just speak, so you just mentioned one, but with the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, I know there's probably some different programs that the RTC may be eligible for. Could you speak to, including, I know, conversion towards zero emission or alternative fuel vehicles are also considered in that? Could you just speak to any of the opportunities that you've identified to harness some of those new federal funding programs?
For the record, MJ Maynard, and thank you, Chair. That again, I'm sorry I didn't mention that because that is a priority for the RTC. So we put together a zero emission vehicle plan to align itself with the goals of the state to be zero emission by 2050, with a big asterisk that says if funding is available. We are but first and foremost, we go after every federal dollar. Every federal dollar we go after. And so we've received just last year and a half, $14 million from the federal government to test battery electric buses and hydrogen fuel cell electric buses. We really want to get smart on the technology before we make a very large investment. But we do have the ability, again, there's been a supply chain issue. Buses are running late. We should have had them in service by now, but we'll have 4 battery electric buses coming in this year and 2 hydrogen fuel cell buses coming in. The IIJA is very specific. There's a lot of opportunity. With a focus on clean energy. So we're going to go after every opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And one last thing that you touched on briefly are some of the that riders need safe service, and I think some of us have been hearing about a variety of safety issues across the county. So I was wondering if you'd just like to provide us a little more information on some of the safety issues that you're facing and working to address.
MJ Maynard, for the record. Thank you. So, public transit is really this moving microcosm of what happens in any urban setting. And so if crime, for example, if crime increases, if homelessness increases, mental illness, drug addiction, if it's happening on the streets of the city you live in, it's happening on public transit. And so as we've seen an increase here in Southern Nevada, we've also seen an increase on our public transit vehicles. We try to use technology where we can, so work closely with all the police departments in Las Vegas. We have the ability right now it's called a live look-in. We can look into any bus at any time and monitor what's happening. We contract out with a private security firm. We use data to understand where those security officers should be positioned. We are using federal dollars to ensure that we're lighting all of our shelters to make sure that the customers feel safe standing at those stops. So, and it's listening to the customers and the drivers, and then reacting as we receive that data.
Assemblywoman Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. Just with the electric buses, because you guys are doing studies, or have you completed them, or are you in the process of?
MJ Maynard, for the record, thank you for that question, Assemblywoman. We wanted to test you can have a manufacturer come and try and sell you something, and we wanted to make sure that what they said they were going to sell was exactly what they were going to sell. So we had them come out to Las Vegas in the hottest month and test a battery electric bus on the Strip. open doors a lot of heat. And actually, we're really pleased with the success of that battery electric bus. It worked out really well. And so just from doing that test first, we knew that's a great opportunity now to start investing in battery electric buses because it proved to be so successful in really extreme conditions. And so we're going to start again through grant funding that we received, 4 battery electric buses we'll receive this year to continue testing, and also 2 hydrogen fuel cell electric buses.
One more follow-up. So I'd like to see your studies with the buses, and just personally bought an electric car, and it's got a lot of electrical stuff to it. And unfortunately, it's been rear-ended twice now. And they can't figure out why the drivetrain just stops in the middle of the road. So I have this vision of these buses getting into accidents, which happens sometimes, and they're driving okay, and then all of a sudden we have this huge backup and you can't move the bus because it just stops. There's no talking to it. So I'd be interested to see about that, because that would be a mess, even though I love the car, right? And I love the idea. We're finding out some other issues that we weren't aware of.
MJ, Mayor, for the record, absolutely will provide you with what we have, and then as we update our Board of Commissioners on the buses themselves as we receive them, we'll make sure and share that with you too.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions, thank you so much for your presentation. Definitely appreciate highlighting some of these issues and look forward to continued conversations to address them and continue to maintain quality and innovative transit options for Southern Nevada. With that, we'll move on to our next presentation from the RTC of Washoe County. Welcome. Take your time, and whenever you are ready, introduce yourselves for the record and you can begin.
All right, good afternoon, Chair Watson, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dale Keller, the Director of Engineering for the Regional Transportation Commission of Washoe County. With me today, I have Paul Nelson, our Government Affairs Officer. I'm pleased to provide the committee an update about who we are and what we do. The RTC of Washoe County is a cooperative regional board, consists of 5 elected representatives appointed from 3 government jurisdictions, 2 from Washoe County, 2 from the City of Reno, and 1 representative from the City of Sparks. The Nevada Department of Transportation Director, Tracy Larkin-Thomason, is an ex officio member. Our chair is Ed Lawson, the Mayor of Sparks, and the RTC Executive Director is Bill Thomas, who is unable to be here today. Created in 1979, the RTC studio extended 3 very core functions, the first one being transportation planning. RTC is the Metropolitan Planning Organization, or MPO, for Washoe County, and we're responsible for the development of our long-range transportation plan, as well as anticipating the transportation needs of for the future of the Truckee Meadows. Second is the engineering construction for our street and highway program, including Transit Capital Project, and this is where we differ from RTC of Southern Nevada. Not only does this agency fund the street projects, we perform these projects on actually behalf of the local jurisdictions. So that consolidation under one RTC roof that includes the planning, the funding, the engineering, the construction, really increases the effectiveness in the implementation of the transportation program in Washoe County. And third is the operation of our public transportation system, with one of our goals to ensure the service is safe, it's reliable, comfortable, and customer focused. Regarding public transportation, the backbone of our transit system is our fixed route bus system named RIDE. There are 25 routes, including 2 rapid bus lines and 1 regional route between Reno and Carson City. There are roughly 4.5 million trips a year on this network, and 60% of those are work-related trips. Now, I want to share some good news, and our team is very excited to share that the RTC achieved our goal of 100% alternative fuel fleet last year, and this is 13 years ahead of schedule of our 2035 goal. RTC Washoe was an early adopter of electric buses. We're the first in Nevada to put them in service in 2014, and today our fleet includes 23 electric buses. That's about 1/3 of our fleet. These buses roughly get about 100 miles per charge, but our fixed route typically travels about 300 miles. So moving to an all-electric fleet would be challenging. However, the technology is improving. The remaining two-thirds of our fleet operate on diesel-electric hybrids or biodiesel or CNG buses. And also we have plans to add our first hydrogen fuel buses in this calendar year. Overall, our transit system is keeping millions of pounds of carbon dioxide out of our air. The bar chart shown the amount of carbon savings from 2022. The gray area accounts for the greenhouse gas reductions for fixed routes, and the blue area illustrates the success of our van pool program, which I'll highlight a little bit later. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about the significant impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on public transit service in Washoe County. Ridership was analyzed both before and during the pandemic. This graph depicts ridership in spring of 2021, the blue dots. It's smaller than the ridership in the fall of 2019, which is the red dots. Ridership decreased about 48% in the early days of the pandemic, but only rebounded to about 65% of pre-pandemic levels. That's a 35% decrease in our ridership. This is the trend with transit agencies across the country. It's not just unique here in Washoe County. RTC recognizes the need to be strategic, innovative, and nimble. Our 2023 to 2027 Transit Optimization Plan Strategies, our TOPS program, identify strategies for retaining current transit riders as well as attracting new ones. And through our Board of Commissioners, the agency's #1 strategic goal is to rebuild our public transportation by rethinking and redefining what the system is as a whole. And how can we use these new service technologies or solutions, these technologies, system improvements for sustainable ridership growth with the focus on equitable and accessible ridership, the reliability and safe services, that service innovation, and then financial sustainability. Furthermore, our peer review of 10 transit agencies was completed for both our fixed route and paratransit systems or services. The peer agencies were selected based on the likeness of RTC Washoe, as well as similar local settings. Overall, RTC spends similar amount of our overall transit services and more per capita. We provide similar services, a similar amount of bus services, and Washoe County residents use more transits than our peers. Now, to attract and grow sustainable ridership, RTC is focused on what you see on the screen is the end-to-end customer experience, where we are focusing more than just the time spent on a vehicle. We're leveraging our existing investment to improve the speed of service whenever possible and feed the rapid transit lines. We're enhancing our digital capabilities by integrating and streamlining the customer experience. So as an example, through a single app on our phones. And then lastly, we're increasing and improving the education and using very smart, targeted communication. And one way we're achieving this goal is expanding our on-demand curb-to-curb service called FlexRide. Our goal is to increase FlexRide of the total numbers of square miles served in the next 5 years. FlexRide began in 2019, and it currently serves 3 zones. The first one is Sparks in the Spanish Springs area. We have the North Valleys in Reno, as well as the Northwest Reno and Somerset Verdi area. Another resource RTC Washoe provides is senior mobility rides and van pool. RTC currently offers Washoe seniors, so that's 60 years and older, as well as veterans and people with disabilities, a subsidized taxi program. Uber and Lyft is included in that to provide mobility options to even areas that are not provided by public transportation. At the bottom of the slide is the RTC Van Pool program. It's a transportation alternative for groups who share commute routes. This Van Pool program is the most cost-effective public transit service that we run. It's our biggest users. Our biggest users are employers who work at the Tahoe Reno Industrial Center. Our fleet is roughly about 350 vans, and it is the 6th largest in the nation. So we're very proud of that program. Now, switching from our transit to our transportation investment, in fiscal year 2022, we invested over $77 million into the community and created over 1,700 direct jobs. Currently, we have 65 active projects in various stages of design, construction, or project closeout. To quickly highlight, our team did an excellent job completing our Mill Street Complete Street project in the heart of Reno. The picture on the bottom left shows the completion of the Lemon Drive project. We just completed a very important connection of Sparks Boulevard. And likewise, the Keeping Good Roads Good with our payment preservation program, where we repaved 60 regional roads that equated to over 10 million square feet of roadway. This can be possible with the revenue that we receive. And our main sources of revenue are the motor vehicle fuel tax and sales tax. These two revenue sources comprise of about 49% and 22% of the RTC's revenue, respectively. Other revenue sources include the regional road impact fees. Those are impacts on new development, federal grants, and passenger fares. This fiscal revenue is about over $200 million. As a side note, just to make sure I'm clear, is the cost to operate our public transportation system relies 100% on local sales tax and passenger fares. As Ms. Maynard mentioned from Southern Nevada, is very ebb and flows. And also federal funding that received through the Federal Transit Administration can only be spent on capital investments and improvements. For this year's expenditures for fiscal year 2023, 30% is used on transit, 30% is used on roadway projects, and 30% is used on preservation and multimodal projects. The remaining 10% is spent on debt service, and a very small portion is spent on our overall operating cost. Washoe County and Clark County are the only Nevada counties with fuel tax indexing. On the screen is the history of this indexing since 2010, has allowed the RTC to keep up with the transportation needs of the community. However, this funding source is plateauing, and with more effective combustion engines and the saturation of electric vehicles. So as the state looks at alternatives for this loss of gas tax revenue, the RTC does support maintaining and increasing funding for regional transportation through an equitable taxation. We would like to ensure any new funding methods are transitioned gradually. And we want to ensure that any new funding methods have been tested and vetted. Chair, thank you for your time. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keller. We'll open it up to questions from members of the committee. We'll start with Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm just curious about the electric buses and the hydrogen buses. It sounds like you haven't placed them in service yet, but I'm sure there's information about what's the efficiency of a hydrogen one versus the electric, or what are the big differences between them? Or are they very similar, just different methods there?
Sure. For the record, Dale Keller, Chair, through you to the Assemblywoman. We are at the edge of where technology has taken us with the electric vehicles. So part of the presentation, we're about 100 miles per charge, and we're looking to supplement that with the hydrogen fuel cell. So we're testing that. These are a very new technology for the bus or fixed routes. So we're going to test them and see how much mileage we can get out of these as well. We'll have more information we can report back to you, and also I can provide more information about the comparison between the two.
Thank you for that. Just to follow up and get some clarity, you do have fully electric buses within your fleet running service right now. Is that correct?
For the record, Dale Keller, yes, Chair, we have about a third of our buses are fully electric, about 23 of them.
Thank you. We'll go to Vice Chair Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. So I have a couple of questions, and my first is really about expansion. I live in Southern Nevada, and I watch our sprawl, and so we continue to expand development of residential communities outside of the existing RTC transportation corridor. I'm curious to know, do you have that same issue with regard to development here in Northern Nevada?
For the record, Dale Keller, Chair, through you to the Assemblywoman, the Vice Chair. Yes, we do. And that's always a balance of where we provide service and making sure there's a value to those services. And we're playing around with that. And FlexRide has been a good example of that from that curb-to-curb network. How our current system is set up, we have these pockets of growth, and we can do a pilot study to making sure that we collect those and they can travel anywhere inside that service area, and then they come to a fixed route to put them into one of our main transfer stations. So we've been playing around with it. We do see some success with that. We can report any additional information you like.
Thank you for that information. I would appreciate the detail. I do have one unrelated question. It's really about some of the services that you provide. I work within the disability community, and there have been a number of times that constituents from northern Nevada have reached out with regard to accessibility for service animals and complaints about some of the van pool pieces. And I'm just curious to know, what's the standardized training? Do you have complaint logs relative to accessibility issues, perhaps for people with disabilities?
For the record, Dale Keller, Chair to the Vice Chair. We do have a record. We can talk about how is that different than what maybe if there's an outlier or we're receiving more of those ADA accessible challenges from our program or not. I don't have that information in front of me, but I can get back with you with that.
Thank you. We'll go to Assemblyman Gurr.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a two-part question. How long does it take to charge an electric bus? And how much electric energy does it take to charge that battery?
For the record, Dale Keller, Chair to the Assemblyman. It all depends.
And you can go directly to the member moving forward.
Thank you, sir. It all depends. What we like to see is, we talked about, we want to keep these buses in service, right? It's not good to have a bus just sitting at our station, not being utilized. So we charge as we go. And we look to charge in off-peak times as well. I don't have the exact information about how much watches or how long they do. I can get back with that information to you.
And I thought I heard you say it goes 100, excuse me, Chair, may I ask some more? I thought you said it goes about 100 miles, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What is the cold weather doing to it? I know they've experimented with the hot weather in Vegas. Have you guys looked at what the cold's doing to them on the charges?
For the record, Dale Keller, yes, we see the same challenges. Any of the extreme heats or extreme colds, we're running the heater, we have open door closes, or the passenger doors open and closing. Yes, that completes complexities, and we're not getting maybe that optimal mileage that we plan on. But we account for that as part of our transit operations.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any additional questions, members of the committee? Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. My colleague's question sprung to mind for me. Are any of your facilities invested in solar? Do you have solar on any of your facilities, whether that's the transportation center in downtown Reno or anywhere that you guys are offsetting your energy costs through that investment?
For the record, Dale Keller, Assemblywoman, at this time I do not believe we have any solar panels on our transit facilities. As we look at alternative ways to those funding sources, we'll continue to explore those options at our facilities.
Sounds like a great way to get some community solar going.
Oh, boy. Any questions from any other members of the committee? All right. Seeing none, thank you so much for your presentation. We appreciate it. Members, we'll now move on to our bill hearings for the day. We're going to begin with Assembly Bill 144, which revises provisions governing the sale of certain lighting products. Welcome, Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Take your time and get ready, and whenever you are, you can introduce yourself for the record and begin. I'll open the hearing on AB 144.
Thank you, Chair Watts, Vice Chair Brown May, and my esteemed colleagues. I am Assemblymember LaRue Hatch. That is spelled L-A space, capital R-U-E, space H-A-T-C-H, just in case you wondered. I am here to present on AB 144, which is a bill phasing out fluorescent light bulbs. And I will pause for a moment to allow my co-presenter to introduce himself as well.
Yes, good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Brian Fady, last name spelled F-A-D-I-E. I'm a state policy manager with the Appliance Standards Awareness Project.
Assemblymember LaRue Hatch for the record. We are going to start this with some key terms because, as you may have noticed in looking at this bill, it is extremely technical and not all of us are electricians or prepared to understand the terms. So I am going to pass this to Brian to explain at least one of the very common terms we see in the bill.
Yes, and just to check on the Zoom here, I'm not able to see sort of if presentation slides are being shown. Are those being shown?
Yes, they are, Mr. Fady.
Okay, thank you. Yes, so we wanted to lay out for folks just a little bit on the technical side of this. You see the term lamp used in the bill, and this is actually the industry term for a light bulb. They refer to it as a lamp. So when you see the word lamp in the bill, it's only referring to the light bulb itself, not to an entire fixture. I think most people, if you hear the word lamp, you might think of sort of a whole lighting fixture sitting on your desk or what have you. But the term lamp in the bill is just referring to a light bulb.
Assemblymember LaRue Hatch for the record. So before we dive into the bill, we'd like to discuss just why this bill came about and the problem that we are trying to solve. In traditional fluorescent tubing, there is mercury inside the tube, which not everyone is aware of, and that mercury causes a health hazard to those that are disposing of it, to those that are nearby when it breaks, to our landfills when it seeps into the water supply. And so we wanted to make sure that we are removing this environmental health hazard for both our consumers as well as our workers. And I'll allow Brian to add a little bit to that.
Yeah, you see the bottom bullet point there about, broken fluorescents. They release a mercury vapor into the air, which really is a threat to human health for anyone who might be around it. You think about workers who have to handle fluorescent light bulbs as part of their job, custodial workers, or those who collect garbage, or workers in the waste stream, folks who work at recycling centers or landfills. Unfortunately, the vast majority of fluorescent light bulbs do not get properly disposed of, and so they end up going in the regular waste stream. And so when they break, they pose that human health hazard. So it's one of the benefits of this policy would be to remove that hazard to workers and anyone else who might be around a fluorescent light bulb when it breaks.
And Assemblymember LaRue Hatch for the record. In addition to the health hazard, there are replacements in LED lamps, which can be plugged into any current fixture, which have many benefits. One, they are a benefit to the consumer because they cost significantly less to operate. You make your money back from the purchase of the lamp in a very quick turnaround. They burn out at a much slower rate so that you are not having to replace the lamps as often. They can be disposed of more cheaply. You don't have to call away to have them hauled out. You can just throw them in the trash. And then they use about half the electricity, so we also have the carbon emission savings from them as well. And Brian, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, Brian Fady for the record. We'll touch on this more in just a second here with the savings that could be seen from transitioning to LEDs. But I should have mentioned kind of at the front end of this, all of this information comes from a report my organization, as well as the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy, ACEEE, we released last year, where we looked at the lighting market and compared LEDs and fluorescents and really answered the questions about, are LEDs ready to go as replacements for fluorescents? And we're happy to provide more information on that, and certainly on any of the technical issues at play. But there's a tremendous amount of utility bill savings and other savings to be had by the transition to LEDs, which I think we'll see on the next slide here.
Yes, so Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, I am a freshman, but I have learned quickly that we love data in this building. So we have a couple of charts, and Brian is going to walk us through the next 3 slides all about the data of this bill.
Yes, thank you. Brian Fady for the record. So we did an analysis of how many fluorescent light bulbs are still being shipped into states and compared, if you transitioned those to LEDs, what sort of savings would you see on utility bills, on greenhouse gas emission reductions? How much mercury pollution would you avoid because you wouldn't have those fluorescent light bulbs that contain mercury coming into the state? And so the slide you see here, we've got 2 time horizons, and these are for the state of Nevada. The top time horizon is annual savings that would be seen in the year 2030. And I'll just note kind of from left to right there, mercury being saved from the fluorescents not being shipped, about 7.7 pounds. There'd be some additional mercury saved from power plant emissions, mercury coming from power plant emissions being avoided. We've got 99,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide avoided. And then annual statewide electricity savings, 339 gigawatt hours of electricity. And then on the far right there, annual electricity bill savings statewide in 2030, looking at about $24 million in statewide electricity bill savings from making this conversion to LEDs. The bottom category there, table there, is cumulative savings through the year 2050. Same categories, just adding up all those years through 2050, how much savings the state would see. And we're happy to talk about that more if folks are interested. I think we can go to the next slide then, yes. So then, the other part of the economics is the fluorescents compared to the LEDs and the prices involved there. So we took a look at all of the different sizes and shapes of the fluorescents compared to the LEDs. On this graph here is just the largest sales volume sizes and shapes. They all end up being at the 4-foot size, but you might see some recognizable terms if you've purchased light bulbs, T8s or T12s. These are all the highest sales volumes. And we looked at if the LED costs more, how much more is that? That's the first column there. Then we looked at, well, what sort of first-year electricity bill savings would you see from purchasing the LEDs? And then we looked at the next column, life cycle savings from the LED versus the fluorescent. And then finally on the right, this is usually the big one, the payback period. How long does it take to recover that increase in price from using the LED versus the fluorescent? And you'll see these numbers all came back really great. Everything is well less than a year, a lot of it less than a couple months. I'll note that one in the middle there, the 0.03. That is by far the most common type of fluorescent. It's called the 4-foot T8. If you're in basically any office setting and you look in the ceiling and you see the linear fluorescent, it's going to be a 4-foot T8. And consequently, the LED makers have made the most replacements for that. And you have a payback period of basically a month. And then you're seeing savings from using the LEDs. So these came back really nice on the economics. Yeah, and then we took a look at, again, sort of how many fluorescent light bulbs are still being shipped to states. A lot of numbers on the left side here, but basically these are all the different sizes and shapes of the fluorescents, and be it the residential sector, commercial, industrial, and these are estimates in the thousands for how many fluorescents still being shipped. So 2023 estimate about 1.8 million general purpose fluorescents to be sold in Nevada this year. I should note there's no general purpose fluorescent lamp manufacturing being done in the United States anymore, and that would include Nevada. All of that manufacturing has moved overseas. But there are LEDs being made in the United States, including in Nevada. Just through a quick search, we were able to find a couple of companies, Green LED Solutions in Henderson, elemental LEDs in sparks, and Ecolocity LEDs also in sparks, and there could be others as well.
Thank you, Brian. Now, I will walk you just briefly through the bill, and then Brian can offer some technical explanations. So we have 2 phase-out dates. The first phase-out date is in January of 2024, and it is that after that date, you cannot sell or distribute compact fluorescent lamps with a screw or bayonet base type. So if you notice that picture, it's those type of light bulbs with a little curlicue and the screw base. And then the second phase out date is for the pin base and then those tube lamps. Now, I will note there are asterisks on there because we are presenting an amendment to push those 2 dates out by 1 year. So in the amended text, it would be 2025 and 2026. That was because we talked to many, many industry partners, and they felt that was enough time to correct the supply chain and prepare for any changes in the retailers. And so that was a result of compromise and a whole lot of dialogue with many stakeholders. And then we have an exceptions list. The full list is in section 6. Again, it is very technical, but it is all the lamps that we felt were such a specific use. We didn't want to impact those use in this bills. We are really going after the lamps that are in the ceiling now, that are in your household, that are in offices, not these niche uses. I will note we have talked to the auto manufacturers. They are bringing an amendment to add 1 small exception for them. Apparently there are vehicles that were produced in the 80s that have a little tiny fluorescent lamp in the dashboard that they can't quite get in LEDs yet. So we will be bringing that as well. And then I'll let Brian speak to why we have 2 separate dates.
Yeah, for the record, Brian Fady. The date on the left is for the, as mentioned, the screw-based compact fluorescents, the old curlicue ones that we really saw through the kind of 2000s and early 2010s. Those have really left the market pretty well already. LEDs have pretty well replaced those. There's still a few stragglers though, but they, retailers and others have really well transitioned most out already out of the screw-based fluorescence. So a faster timeline would be appropriate there. And then we give the additional time for the rest of the fluorescents, which still have the higher sales volumes. This is sort of a standard length of time. We use it on the appliance efficiency standards front as well to give retailers and others a little time to adjust their inventory, sell through any existing inventory, make any other adjustments they need to before the sales deadline kicks in.
Now, Selena LaRue Hatch for the record, we want to make very clear this bill is not requiring anyone to change out current light bulbs, and it's not requiring any changes of fixtures. It just means when your bulb burns out, if it happens to be 2025, when you go to the store, there won't be a fluorescent on the shelf. You don't have to change anything immediately, and all of the LEDs are compatible with the current fixtures. So no one would have to change their fixtures or upgrade anything or rip anything out. It's simply just changing what kind of bulb is on the shelf when you go to the store. And I'll let Brian speak to that a little bit more in depth.
Yeah, Brian Fady for the record. We've got this kind of closing slide here. On the right is the research report that my organization and ACAAA put together. Again, happy to pass that along or answer any questions, talk further about the technical side. I'd point to in the top left there, we've got an advertisement from Philips. This is one of those sort of don't take our word for it images. The same manufacturers who make the fluorescents mostly make the LEDs. It's big brand names that folks know. And they're talking there about real pros saying farewell to fluorescence. And we have marketing material from other LED makers and the big name brands as well saying about the same. So happy to take any questions and to follow up with any committee members.
And that is where we're at. Questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Fady, Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch for the presentation. We'll move on to questions. We'll start with Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for bringing this bill forward and for your presentation. I guess my question, and it wasn't very, I didn't find it very clear, maybe in the bill. I'm reading the amendment, but my question pertains to the actual issue of supply and demand and the impact, especially on our public buildings, because we know schools, hospitals, governmental buildings, many of them already have these fluorescent lights. And so if we're saying by 2026 or 27 that we're not requiring in homes, but for business, everyone to switch out, and that it's supposed to pertain to the same fixtures, I guess I'm wondering about supply and demand. Come 2026, will, one, we have the supply here in the state, and also, is there a financial impact on all of our public buildings?
Selena LaRue Hatch for the record, and I appreciate that question. In talking with stakeholders, that is why we pushed out those dates. They felt like that was enough time for the supply chain to react appropriately and for us not to experience any shortages or any issues. By that time, by those dates, the 2025 and 2026, most of the fluorescent lamps will have burned out and needed to be replaced in those buildings you're talking about. So this shouldn't be an overnight, you have to change everything. It's as it burns out, you switch out a new one. We talked to retailers. They felt like this was enough time for their industry to change out the shelves and start changing out the stock. And so it's not an overnight change. It's a gradual one. And I can let Brian add to that if you want to.
Yes, thank you. For the record, Brian Fady, through the chair to the Assemblywoman. I'll just add, we did run economic analysis of a couple of typical buildings that might be switching over from fluorescents to LEDs. Schools was one of those, and I'm happy to provide this information, but we found a typical school would save about $3,700 per year on electricity bills savings, and over the life of the LED, about $24,000 in life cycle savings for a school that switches over from fluorescents to LEDs.
And Chair, may I add, Selena LaRue Hatch for the record, in talking to many government agencies, we've had discussions with many over the last few days. A lot of them said they were already switching to LEDs because it cost less for them. And it is a pretty quick turnaround time for that payback. And so I think that this is something many government institutions are already looking at. So I don't know that it would be a dramatic change for them.
I see many questions here. We're going to start with Assemblywoman Dickman, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Peters, and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you so much, Chair. I just wanted to clarify these inspections in Section 9 are not of the businesses who happen to be using fluorescent lights, it's of the retailers who are selling them, correct?
Selena LaRue Hatch for the record, that is correct. It is not businesses. This is simply on the retailers.
And follow up quick. So in my business, for example, I don't have to change all of my bulbs at once. And let's say I have bulbs that go till 2027. They live that long. I can still use them till they die.
Yes, Selena LaRue Hatch for the record. You absolutely would. This is simply controlling what is on the shelf at the store when you go there. It is not controlling anything else as far as your business or your home.
Okay, thanks. I just want to make that clear on the record. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Peters, then we'll go to Assemblyman Gurr.
Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to ask a question. Thank you so much for bringing this bill and for your enthusiasm on the effects that these kinds of changes can have in our state. I had a question about impact to online sales of fluorescents and how the bill addresses that issue in our state, and also how many other states are transitioning like this through statutory requirements.
Selena LaRue Hatch for the record. I'm absolutely going to phone a friend on that one. So Brian, go for it.
Thank you for the record, Brian Fady, through the chair, Assemblywoman, great question. For other states, last year, California adopted the same policy, and also Vermont. This year, 10 states are considering this same fluorescent phase-out policy. In the West, Colorado, New Mexico, Oregon, Washington State, and Hawaii are considering it, in addition to states in the East. For online sales, online retailers would be expected to comply the same as a brick and mortar store in the state. And I think, we're going to see not only now that California has adopted, which is quite a large market, but additional states will likely be adopting. You see kind of a strength in numbers effect there of, manufacturers becoming more aware, retailers becoming more aware. States can communicate with each other if they spot any violations. This is similar again to what we see on the appliance standards front. So it's something a couple of states have adopted, and we're looking forward to more.
Thank you so much. So I'm looking at Section 8, and it refers to a person who violates any provision of Section 7, which is the sale ban. Would that also include those online sales folks? I'm curious about enforcement, right, for online sales in particular. If you have an eBay sale, or if you have a private sale online somewhere, how does this impact them? That kind of situation.
Brian, I'm gonna pass that to you.
Thank you. Through the chair, Assemblywoman, the bill would not prohibit the sale of used fluorescent light bulbs. So in the case of an eBay sale, somebody had fluorescents and they took them out of their, storeroom, or, they were already using them and they wanted to resell them. They could in fact do that. This would only cover the sales of new products.
Okay. I have continued questions on that piece. If we can take it offline and go over those concerns. Thank you.
Thank you.
And Chair, can I just say, we had a meeting right before this with the Department of Energy, and they felt that the Attorney General's office would probably be the more appropriate enforcer of this. Obviously, that meeting happened literally 10 minutes before I came in, so we don't have that amendment, but I wonder in that discussion if we could also address your concerns.
Thank you. Look forward to continued conversation on that. Next, we'll go to Assemblyman Gurr, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Gallant, then we'll go to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I still think you're right on line going this way, but is this not a solution looking for a problem? If Philips and GE and everybody are converting, how long is it going to be before we can even buy the old incandescent bulb? So in looking at legislation, the less we put into law today, the better off it is, in my opinion.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember LaRue Hatch. The reason we felt that this was important to put into legislation is, yes, many people are transitioning to LEDs. This is a consumer protection thing. A lot of businesses agree with it. But with the number of states considering this legislation, we do not want to be the last state that bans this, and then we become the dumping ground for everyone's fluorescent lamps because they can't sell them anywhere else. And so we wanted to make sure we were in line with other states for that reason.
Follow up? Well, getting in line in first is second, third is a good idea, but if the manufacturers quit making them, what difference does it make? We're out of business. Those people are out of business if they're still making incandescent bulbs. So there won't be a dumping state anywhere.
Brian, would you like to jump in?
Thank you. For the record, Brian Fady, through the chair, to the Assemblyman. One reason I think is there does still seem to be an inertia, particularly on the commercial buildings sector, where that's where the bulk of the sales are still taking place. I think you see sort of building managers and folks who manage the lightings in buildings. They're used to purchasing fluorescents. They're still purchasing fluorescents, and so we're still seeing good sized sales of the fluorescents. As the Assemblywoman mentioned, this is about accelerating a transition that is underway, but it's a way to gain those savings on utility bills faster, on emissions, air pollution, the mercury as a source of mercury pollution in the state. You know, it's a way of cutting off this supply of mercury pollution that's coming into the state. That, you know, there doesn't seem to be a terribly robust sort of mercury take back program currently available around Nevada. If you're in Carson City, it sounds like you can call up a local government and take back your bulbs. But if you're anywhere else, there doesn't seem to be a local government option. You're stuck making your own arrangements with a private recycler or garbage hauler, which is a barrier that perhaps most people won't get over. So it's cutting off a source of mercury pollution as well, which is a nice benefit.
Thank you. I have more questions, but I'd do it offline with the assembly person, please.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Next, we'll go to Assemblywoman Gallant.
Thank you, Chair. I do think this is going in the right direction. I don't like fluorescent lights. We've been changing over to LED, like in all of our rental properties and our personal homes. And I mean, even those tube lightings that, I mean, if a tenant needs that changed out, we have to send somebody because it's dangerous for them to do it. So I do appreciate that. However, in our experience, we've had to do some simple wiring in order to bypass the ballast when converting those light bulbs. So, you know, I'm curious with the cost savings, has the labor and some of that extra wiring, which would require a licensed electrician, which are expensive and few and far between in Vegas at least, have you guys accounted for that cost that is going to be on maybe some of those businesses? Like, I'm not so worried about like maybe just a personal residence, it's smaller, but if you're talking about 100 fixtures, that's a lot.
Assemblymember LaRue Hatch for the record. Brian, can you speak to the Assembly member's concern?
Yes, thank you. For the record, Brian Fady, through the chair to the Assemblywoman. We did run economic analysis on situations where you might do a ballast bypass, as you referenced, and I can get those numbers for you. The long story short was they came back positive economically for the user in all but one instance. There was in the residential sector, if you had an 8-foot length fluorescent and you were doing a ballast bypass, basically it ended up being that, you know, we found people don't usually run a light bulb in that situation very many hours. And the fewer hours you run it, the less you are able to make up on electricity bill savings because you're just not running it very much. So, but in the other instances, even with the ballast bypass and the cost of labor, it still came back life cycle, you know, break even or save money.
What year was that study done? Because we've since had massive inflation since then.
Yes, through the chair, to the Assemblyman Brian Fady, 2022, we released the study in early 2022. So, you know, some of the numbers were ran kind of late 2021.
Can I see, whenever you have a chance, if you could email me that'd be great.
So thank you for that, Mr. Fady. If you can just provide that follow-up to our committee staff, we'll make sure it's distributed to all members and appreciate that response. We'll go next to Assemblywoman Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. A little bit along the lines of some of the other colleagues' questions, and we talked about public buildings and schools and hospitals. I was also wondering about, you know, all of our resort communities, the casinos, the big convention halls. You know, were they also part of the stakeholders you reached out to and questioned? Because I'm just concerned if there's some huge cost. I think about these big convention halls and.
Thank you for the question, Assemblymember LaRue Hatch. For the record, we did include the Resorts Association in this conversation. They were comfortable with the amendment, pushing it out that one extra year so that they had time for exactly what you're describing. I know that many of them are, as I said, switching to LEDs already because of the cost, but they were part of the conversation, and that's part of where the amendment came from.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, additional questions? Assemblywoman Dickman, a very quick follow-up.
Thank you. This is actually almost a little different topic, but I was just wondering if there's any evidence detailing the extent of the toxic contamination with the current fluorescent bulbs.
I'm going to pass that to Brian because he's the expert.
Yes, again, Brian Fady, for the record, through the chair to the Assemblywoman. There's actually a companion report to my organization's report, which talks about that situation you're describing, the human health hazard associated with fluorescent bulbs and the mercury that they can release. I know that there's a couple of studies in there about workers at landfills being overexposed to mercury, and a couple of other situations where folks are overexposed to mercury. And so we can certainly pass that along as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that. I look forward to all the members reading the many pieces of follow-up information that will be distributed to them, and appreciate the fact that so much of this information has been compiled. One of the questions I was going to ask was to put those pounds of mercury in context, because 7 pounds may not sound like a lot, but it's a highly toxic substance, and so would appreciate some additional follow-up in the form of that report that you mentioned. One of the things that I wanted to ask about in some of the additional materials that were provided, it was mentioned that there are actually some local LED producers, and I was just wondering if you had any additional information about that you could provide.
Brian, can you speak about those producers?
Yeah, for the record, Brian Fady to the chair. We do not have additional information at this time, but it's part of demonstrating that, again, the fluorescent light bulb manufacturing has unfortunately left the United States, and now LEDs are being produced in the U.S. Certainly, some of it's being overseas as well, but it's the kind of product where they're able to produce it locally as well. And so, we were able to identify 3 companies doing that. And again, there could be additional companies as well.
And just to add to that, Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, for the record, that is on the one-pager. So we have Green LED Solutions, which is in Henderson, Elemental LED, which is in Sparks, and Ecolocity LED, which is also in Sparks. And so we wanted to highlight that these are local Nevada businesses that we would be supporting in this bill.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And just to go back and make sure that we've got a really fine point on this. So, because we've talked a lot about it on the retailer side, some questions have been brought up about individual homeowners or businesses. So folks can stock up on as many of these mercury-ridden, more expensive LEDs as they'd like prior to the implementation date, and use them until their stockpile runs out if they would like to. Is that correct?
Assemblymember LaRue Hatch, for the record, that is in fact correct. If you want to make a bunker of fluorescent lamps and just ride out the end times with it, you are welcome to do so.
Thank you for that. And I know I will just note for members' awareness that, and we may have somebody from the Resorts Association come, but many of the resorts have already, as you've noted, made this transition, and it's one of the more cost-effective energy efficiency measures that has been identified. So. The one other thing that I wanted to just bring up quickly, and I think this question is probably best suited directly for Mr. Fady, is there were questions kind of about taking this on sooner rather than later, but I guess question one, by the time this is implemented, based on the cost trends that you've seen, do you think that the payback periods that are currently estimated are going to be even shorter as LEDs become as scaled up more and more available? And then the second question is, could you just kind of, at a very high level for members that aren't familiar with some of the standard setting process, kind of discuss how states tend to set standards and then over time that leads to a federal standard, and how much time that may sometimes take?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, for the questions. Again, Brian Fady for the record. We do anticipate that the costs of LEDs will continue to come down as they have pretty dramatically over the last 10 years. The bill, with the amendment, you wouldn't have the sales date coming into effect for the vast majority of the bulbs for about 3 years. So you would have additional time for, the price gap to close. Our numbers are, an average. We put together a robust database comparing like for like fluorescents versus LEDs across the different sizes and shapes. But you can already, today go to a store and see that the LEDs are very closely priced to the fluorescents. I was just checking Home Depot yesterday and could find a 10-pack of 4-foot T8s with LED and fluorescents, and they were about 30 cents apart for the pack of 10. So it's, it's something that the economics are already quite good and will only get better. On the question of state action leading to federal action, yes. States have often, as with so many things, states have often led the way. We've seen this on the appliance efficiency front, where once sort of a momentum of states that have adopted the policy, enough of them adopt, you see the federal government take action and just adopt it for the rest of the country. You could see that here, we'll see. This also plays into, in fact, internationally, where there's conversations taking place amongst countries about phasing out the fluorescent light bulbs because of the mercury. It's the utility bill savings, it's the energy savings, but boy, mercury is just such a nasty, toxic substance and causes a lot of problems to a lot of folks. And, I think people are eager to not have to use that technology anymore. There's an alternative that doesn't have those negative effects and in fact gains you a whole lot. So as US states take action, it will both push federal action and even international action potentially.
Thank you for that. Thank you again to all the members for their questions. I encourage you to take any additional questions you have and follow up directly with the presenter. Mr. Fady, we look forward to the additional information. And again, thank you both for the presentation. With that, we're going to open up testimony on Assembly Bill 144. Before I begin, just a quick note. It sounds like there is one very clear amendment and some other conceptual amendments that are in the works. As a quick reminder for everyone, support testimony means support for the bill with a friendly amendment, including if that amendment's in the works. Opposition testimony is opposition to the bill. So if you have an additional amendment that you are seeking outside of the scope of what's been discussed, that's opposition. And then if you would just like to provide some additional context but did not have a position, that is neutral testimony. So we'll begin with testimony in support of Assembly Bill 144. Anyone wishing to provide testimony in support here in Carson City, please come forward. If there's anyone in Las Vegas, please come forward as well.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts and members of the committee. My name is Angie Dykema. It's ANGIE-DYKEMA, and I'm here on behalf of the Southwest Energy Efficiency Project, otherwise known as SWEEP. SWEEP is a nonprofit organization dedicated to advancing energy efficiency, decarbonization, and clean transportation in order to save customers money and protect the environment and address the climate crisis and build a more resilient, sustainable economy. I am the Nevada representative, and we also work across the Southwest. We are here in strong support of the bill because it saves consumers and businesses money, reduces toxic pollutants in our air and water, and saves energy. The bill accelerates the market transition from fluorescent light bulbs to cleaner, safer, more efficient, and longer-lasting LEDs. And as you've seen by the presentation, they've advanced tremendously in the last 10 years and are now widely available and cost-effective to replace fluorescents in many different shapes and sizes. By 2030, Nevada consumers and businesses would save $24 million annually from this transition, in addition to preventing 8 pounds of mercury, which, as Mr. Fady noted, is actually a lot, and 99,000 metric tons of CO2 from entering our atmosphere. The bill is not only cost-effective, but also necessary for public health and aligned with our state policy to reach our climate goals. And we encourage all of you to please support. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Kyle Davis, here today on behalf of Western Resource Advocates. There's a letter on Nellis detailing our support, so I will just leave it with the letter, and thank the Assemblywoman for bringing the bill forward.
Thank you for your brevity and your comments. Next.
Chairman, for the record, my name is Annette Magnus, and I'm the Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. I'm here today in support of AB 144. As you heard, fluorescent bulbs are a huge health hazard for our communities, and we know we have better methods for lighting in 2023. We believe that this bill is the direction that our state must move in to ensure that we continue to address the very real situation with climate crisis. It also will save Nevadans money by using more efficient bulbs. We hope you will support this important legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Magnus. Next.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christy Cabrera Georgeson, CABRERAGEORGESON. I'm the Deputy Director of the Nevada Conservation League, here in support of AB 144. Transitioning away from old, inefficient, toxic fluorescent light bulbs is a proven mechanism to save consumers and businesses money on their utility bills, reduce greenhouse gas emissions from our homes and buildings, and protect public health. In comparison to fluorescent light bulbs, LEDs use about half the amount of energy, last twice as long, and typically cost less. Additionally, switching to LEDs is estimated to prevent 1.1 million metric tons of carbon dioxide per year by 2050. That's the equivalent of 238,000 gasoline-powered vehicles driven for a year. Fluorescent light bulbs also contain mercury, which we've heard a lot about, while LEDs are mercury-free, making them a much safer option. We urge the committee's support on this bill, and we'd like to thank the Assemblywoman for bringing it forward.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts, members of the committee. My name is Ryan Bellows. I'm the Vice President of Government and External Relations for NV Energy, and I'm here today in support of Assembly Bill 144. NV Energy is certainly supportive of measures that are going to address and increase energy efficiency, and also measures which will help the state achieve both carbon reduction goals and environmental goals. And NV Energy has worked with customers and businesses across the state to already help them transition towards LED bulbs and on these energy efficiency measures. So certainly believe this bill is going in the right direction, and here to urge your support of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bellows. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Hilderby on behalf of the American Institute of Architects. Pleased to support measures such as this. The built environment is an important part as we increase efficiency of meeting the state's climate and energy policy goals. I'm happy to support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no one else at this time, seeing no one in Las Vegas, Broadcast Production Services, do we have anyone wishing to provide testimony in support of AB 144 by phone?
If you would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Vice Chair.
as well as the rest of the members of the committee. My name is Michael Willoughby. I'm speaking today on behalf of the Climate Power Campaign in support of AB 144. The transition away from fluorescent light bulbs that contain mercury and replacing them with LED lights presents numerous benefits, both for the environment and for our economy. By making the switch, we can reduce the amount of mercury released into the environment, which can harm wildlife and negatively impact human health. According to the U.S. EPA, mercury-containing bulbs can contribute to soil and water pollution if they're not disposed of properly. Thus, making the switch to LED lights helps to reduce the amount of mercury pollution in our environment. In addition to the environmental benefits, there are economic benefits to using LED lights as well. LED lights are more energy efficient than traditional fluorescent light bulbs, meaning they use less electricity to produce the same amount of light. This can translate to lower energy bills for households, businesses, and municipalities, ultimately saving money in the long run and reinforcing our clean energy goals. Furthermore, LED lights have a longer lifespan than fluorescent bulbs, meaning they need to be replaced less often. This contributes to further cost savings and reduces the amount of waste produced by spent bulbs. Transitioning away from fluorescent light bulbs that contain mercury and replacing them with LED lights is a crucial step towards creating a more sustainable and prosperous future. By reducing the amount of mercury pollution in the environment, lowering energy costs, and supporting a growing industry, we can reap the benefits of a cleaner, more efficient, and more prosperous future. Thank you very much to the sponsor and the co-sponsors of this bill, and we urge your support.
Thank you, Mr. Willoughby. BPS, next caller.
Hi, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Lakshmi Albright. It's spelled Lakhshmi Albright. I'm a volunteer member of the Sierra Club, and on behalf of the club and our more than 30,000 members and supporters statewide, I'm speaking today in support of AB 144, banning the sale of compact fluorescent lights, CFLs. This type of light bulb was an upgrade over an energy inefficient incandescent option in the past, but since then, better technologies have become available, and CFLs have been proven to have significant drawbacks that outweigh any potential benefits. Much of the other benefits have been mentioned by the previous speakers. So, and I've also submitted a written testimonial to the committee. So I'll take the rest of my reading out. And thank you very much for the consideration, and thank you for introducing this bill.
Thank you very much for your comments. BPS, next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Chairman and the rest of the committee. This is Dora Martinez representing the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition. I am the advocate for my grassroots organization, and I want to veto the prior callers. As a blind person, I don't really see the point of electricity light bulb, but my daughter said it's useful for others. So I agree and support this bill, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martinez. We appreciate your comments, and you always bring a smile to our faces. BPS, next caller, please.
Callers, if you have recently joined and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9. Chair, there are no other callers choosing to participate in support at this time.
Thank you. We'll now move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 144. And anyone wishing to provide testimony in opposition in Las Vegas, please come forward. Mr. Keith, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for your time. For the record, my name is Dylan Keith, Assistant Director of Government Affairs at the Vegas Chamber. We are in opposition to this bill as currently drafted. We have been working with the sponsor and thank her for taking our amendment. Once it is drafted with that amendment, we are happy to move to the neutral, and until that time, we are in opposition. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Keith, and please do follow up once the amendments have come forward to the bill. Thank you. Anyone else wishing to provide testimony in opposition? Seeing no one in Carson City or Las Vegas, BPS, can we see if anyone wishes to provide opposition testimony by phone?
Callers, if you would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now. One moment, Chair. Chair, we have 2 callers. We are just waiting for them to unmute. Caller, you are unmuted and may begin.
Marcos Lopez, Nevada Policy, MARCOS-LOPEZ. We're in opposition to Assembly Bill 144, largely because we believe it is unneeded. Consumers are already transitioning over to LED lights, with the U.S. Energy Department noting that nearly half of U.S. households use LED light bulbs for all or most of their indoor lighting already. Market share continues to grow in both commercial and residential for LED lights at an extremely high rate. And it's all because of the reasons that the sponsor is listing. We do not need to impose a ban that will increase cost on late adopters by preventing them to be able to choose. This is fundamentally a decision about choice. And a lot of the economic benefits that they're saying, the cost savings because of the ban, are actually being overestimated by the erroneous belief that consumers will not choose LEDs on their own. The economic case is very clear to switch. People will do this on their own. There is no need. There is plenty of studies that shows that consumer behaviors are smart enough to make their own decisions, and that regulators' presumption of consumer irrationality is wrong. Whether it's fuel-efficient vehicles, energy-efficient light bulbs, or appliances, all heavy-handed government regulation does is just impose greater costs and limit choice of late adopters. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lopez. Next caller, BPS.
This is Wes Razar with Americans for Prosperity on behalf of Americans for Prosperity Nevada and 100,000 activists. We urge the legislators to oppose this bill. Although the intent is well received and there are some great insights there, we believe in free market principles. And as previously stated in multiple testimonies, we recognize the market is already going in that direction. Manufacturers are limiting the production of fluorescent light bulbs due to the efficiency and what the consumers are demanding. And we feel that this is an overreach of government that will lead to unintended consequences. And lastly, we also don't want to be considered a state that actually sends an inspector into retail facilities to hit them with a fine for light bulbs. Thank you, and I urge you to oppose this bill.
Thank you for your comments. BPS, do we have anyone else wishing to provide testimony in opposition by phone?
Callers, if you have recently joined and would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no other callers choosing to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you. With that, we'll move to testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 144.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts and members of the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure. Brian Wachter, Senior Vice President with the Retail Association of Nevada. We appreciate the sponsor's willingness to consider extending the timeline in her amendment. We appreciate the additional time, to answer the question from the Assemblywoman from Southwest Las Vegas. We think this time will give us the ability to make sure that we have met manufacturers and vendors to be able to get the supply chain prepared, as well as to be able to start explaining to customers who, for whatever reason, seem to have a preference for these types of light bulbs, for them to start making that change. There's a generation of Americans that remember somewhat fondly playing with mercury, I think, in high school. And so they have slightly different relationship with some of these issues. And so we appreciate the ability to be able to move the supply chain. I did want to address the question from the Assemblywoman from Central Reno, where looking at online companies and being able to go after those folks, it's just not possible. Given Nevada, we don't have the information nor the manpower to be looking at those, but we would consider and strongly urge the legislature to take a look at additional provisions that you could put into online marketplaces that would seek to solve the problem that Assemblywoman Peters addressed.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. While I have you here, I do have one quick question for you. I know, and first of all, really appreciate your working with the bill sponsor on this amendment. I know in the past you have worked with sponsors of measures on adjustments and amendments to resolve your concerns, and then your organization has graded members negatively in your legislative matrix based on supporting that even after those concerns were addressed. So for the benefit of the sponsor of this measure, I'd just like to know if you have any insight to share as to how your organization will proceed after these concerns have been addressed via amendment.
Mr. Chair, Brian Wachter with the Retail Association of Nevada. I appreciate the question. I do not recall, and I'd have to look back actually going to the table on previous legislation. We are always happy to work with bill sponsors, and I think in the case that you're referencing, I'm not sure that we and the bill sponsor ever had a direct conversation on that bill. But working with stakeholders to be able to make sure, first and foremost, that as a retail industry, we can comply with the wishes of the legislature. Can we actually implement the bills and what you're looking at, and do we think overall that those are going to have negative impacts on consumers, and how we can best mitigate those consequences, both the unintended consequences that we can't adjust for, and the exact intended consequences that the legislature is looking for. And you're going to hear from us on several different manufacturing bills that I think fall into this category over the course of the session, and we hope to be able to be consistent in our response.
Thank you. I hope for that as well. We'll move on to the next person wishing to provide testimony.
Good afternoon. Alex Tanchik on behalf of Silver State Government Relations, representing the Sierra Cannabis Coalition. I was asked to come up and put on the record that cannabis cultivation is a lighting-intensive process, and some of them may be using fluorescent lighting. Currently, we're polling our members to see what kind of lighting they use. As soon as we hear back from members, we will report to committee members and to the sponsor of the bill.
Thank you. Please keep us posted on that. Anyone else wishing to provide testimony in the neutral position on AB 144? Seeing no one in person, BPS, do we have anyone wishing to provide neutral testimony by phone?
Callers, if you would like to provide neutral testimony for Assembly Bill 144, please press star 9 now.
Good afternoon. My name is Cyrus Sojati, Cyrus Hojjaty. I'm neutral on this bill. I do believe that situation with mercury is a serious concern. I mean, heck, we have a lot of it in our food, believe it or not. I have noticed that many countries doing research in Europe, Iran, China, put a ban on these things. So this is not just a few states, it's all over the world. However, I have some concerns. I don't want it to increase costs for businesses and low-income people. And I'm pretty suspicious about things that are first approved by states like California and how they use the term climate to address this, which I'm not sure. I don't know how this is going to address the climate, but I do believe, yeah, we have to move away from these bulbs. It all depends on how it's done. Oh, and by the way, I work for an architectural firm too, so this matters a lot. Thank you so much. Yield my time.
Thank you for your comments. PPS, next caller, please.
Chair, the line is open. There are no other callers to testify at this time.
All right, again, I want to thank the presenters of this bill. I think in the interest of time, we're going to move on to our next bill presentation. So thank you again. I will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 144, and I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 161, which revises provisions governing driver's licenses. Welcome, Assembly members. And whenever you're ready, you can introduce yourselves for the record and begin.
Thank you, Chair Watts and members of the committee. For the record, I am Cameron C.H. Miller, representing Assembly District 7 within Clark County, and it is my extreme pleasure and honor to present Assembly Bill 161 today, which revises provisions governing driver's licenses. We obviously had a whole program planned, but my co-sponsor and colleague, Assemblywoman Shannon Bilbray Axelrod, has to get back to her committee, so we're going to go a bit out of order and allow her to make her remarks first, and then I will follow. Thank you.
And thank you for that. I'm okay, but I'm honestly just kind of jumping on his. Anyways, thank you, Assemblyman Miller. Thank you, Assemblyman Watts. It's a pleasure to be in front of Growth and Infrastructure. I have no problem saying I loved this committee when I had the pleasure to serve on this committee. Fortunately, education meets at the same time, so I'm no longer on it, but I'm jealous of all of you. I had a bill that I put in specifically for deaf and hard of hearing folks, and we have someone doing ASL right now, so thank you. And as you all know, we kind of work in a little bit of silos when we're putting in our BDRs. So Assemblyman Miller came to me and said, I have a very similar bill, and we realized they were completely germane in the same section. So instead of putting two bills, and I just basically folded mine into his, like you fold in the cheese. So I now have my bill that was before, and I've folded it in, and basically what our bill is doing, instead of specifically about autism or hard of hearing, we're just addressing it with how communication challenges. So my bill, how this came to be, as a person who is deaf or hard of hearing, which is where I was coming from, they have interactions with law enforcement that could otherwise be avoided. Initially, we had thought about putting a designation on a driver's license, but when working with the deaf and hard of hearing community, we realized that's not something that you really want to be handing over to someone. You're already feeling kind of vulnerable when you have hearing loss, and so handing your ID over to someone to purchase alcohol, all of a sudden they know now that you might be someone who is a little bit more vulnerable, and it's just not a position that we wanted to do. So talking with my colleague, we decided that we were going to actually specifically ask for it to be on registration. So when you get pulled over, the officer is aware that there's a communication issue, whether that be hard of hearing or other things that my colleague will talk about. I will personally tell you that I have an issue. I lost partial hearing when I was in my 30s. I got an infection. Had I gone to the doctor immediately, I could have probably had it fixed, but I didn't, as we sometimes do in our 30s, and it has progressively got worse. A lot of you know me well, and when I talk to you, if you go to whisper to me, I turn and I give you this right ear because I can't hear whispering in this ear. So if you can imagine me being pulled over, the police officer comes to my window, and I immediately do this just out of complete habit, because this is what I do when he's talking. Maybe there's traffic going by. Well, the police officer could easily, what are you looking, what are you going to grab? So this just is a common sense solution. So it protects the folks who have the impairment, the communication impairment, and it also is a technique to help our officers realize that, you know, not just because someone isn't communicating well means they're under the influence of something. Or so that's how the bill sort of came to be. I put in an amendment. I think you have it. Was it uploaded to Nellis, Mr. Chairman?
I believe we do have an amendment
It's
uploaded to Nellis, so I believe
it should
that
be
is
the correct amendment. So the proposed amendment defines a person with communication impairment as any person who is deaf, any person who has speech or language disorder, any person who has an auditory processing disorder, any person that is due a neurodivergent and has communication impairment. This would be the original intent of my bill, AB 133, that I folded in. Let's see. I also want to stress that this is completely voluntary. This bill does not require a person who is deaf or hard of hearing to have the designation placed on their driver's license. My proposed language gives people the option to apply for the designation. I will turn it back over to my chair, and I think you can handle it from here. Thank you very much for your indulgence.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. It was good to have you back.
Thank you, Chair and Committee. I definitely wanted to make sure that we got my co-sponsor's remarks on the record in the presentation so that she could get back to her business in the Education Committee. Along with me is Attar Hasibullah of the ACLU, and he's going to actually go through some of the details of the bill so that we are all clear on exactly what the bill will do and what it looks like in action. But I'm going to provide just a little bit of background on how I got to this particular bill, to working on this issue. And it starts like this. I received a phone call late one night from an evening that would have, late one evening from a friend that would have ordinarily been full of bad, questionable jokes and a lot of laughter. But on this night, she was a worried mom. And you could hear in her voice that she was trying with all her might to hold it together, because she had just gotten word that her young adult son, who has autism, had been arrested. He had been stopped and questioned by police, and at some point during the encounter, officers believed that he was under the influence of a substance, even though he was not, and ultimately arrested him for a DUI. Now, as she explained the details of what happened, she said, you know, if there was just something on his ID, I think it would have helped. The officers would have at least known that he wasn't impaired by an influence, and that it just takes him a bit longer to process and respond to information because he's a little different. You know him, he's just doesn't always interpret social cues the same way as everyone else, to which I agreed. And while this situation is unfortunate, it resulted in another young man of color unnecessarily involved in the legal system. But we must recognize that it could have been worse for both my friend's son and the officers involved. I know we've all heard the tragic stories from other communities across the country of people who are differently abled losing their life or being severely injured due to a misinterpretation of their actions. Autism spectrum disorder is where this started for me. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder that is often characterized by repetitive behaviors and challenges relating to communication and social interaction. Multiple studies indicate that people with ASD are more likely to become incarcerated and are more vulnerable to injuries and fatalities during police interactions. As a legislative body, we have a duty to provide options for vulnerable people to have a choice in the level of protection that they deem necessary, and to support our law enforcement officials in their responsibilities. AB 161, as my colleague said, is a common sense solution that will do both. By giving Nevadans with communication impairments and those that are differently abled the choice to add an indicator to their DMV records, and by giving law enforcement an additional tool to alert them that someone's response or actions during an encounter may be a matter of how they receive or deliver communications rather than a threat or an act of defiance. This is, again, a common sense measure that gives people the choice and creates a safer environment for all parties involved, which is why I'm happy to see the amount of support that we have seen in putting this bill together. Now, while this bill started for me with autism and with my colleague with her personal hearing impairment, it was brought to my attention by ACLU that there are people with other neurodevelopmental disorders that could be helped by the bill. And then I learned of my colleague's bill, and we all got together and worked together on the amendment that you all have. And to move forward and to get us the ball rolling, I'm going to pass it over, with the chair's permission, to Atar Hasibullah of the ACLU to go through the details of the bill and what it looks like in action. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Go ahead, Mr. Hasibullah.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. It's nice to be before the Committee on Growth and Infrastructure here in the People's House. I'm joined by my colleague Lily Barron from the ACLU. She had a couple statistics that she did want to share with you all before we get into the technical specifics. I do know that there is some sort of a snowstorm that is coming here, as I was told about 100 times by text, just FYI, so we will attempt to keep it brief. I do want to make sure that we give enough time for those who have testimony to offer in support for them to give it, but also to answer any questions that come up. There are a couple technical quirks here that I did want to share with the committee, but I'll go ahead and pass it over to Lily to share some of that information, and then we'll swing back on the technical specifics.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Lilith Barron. I'm the policy manager for the ACLU of Nevada. That's LILITHBARAN. In one of the books that we researched, Policing, a Journal of Police and Practice, there was a finding that a survey of parents and caregivers of individuals with autism spectrum disorder, 60.3% of respondents were fearful of police contact with their loved one with autism spectrum disorder. Of those respondents, 30.1 reported that their fear of police contact was due to the potential for misunderstanding behavior. Of those respondents, 34% reported that their fear of police contact was due to communication issues, and respondents who have had prior police contact were more likely to report being fearful of police contact than those who had not had prior contact with police. So those numbers I'd like you to keep in mind as we go through our presentation. We are currently experiencing a small technical difficulty. I know that the committee can view our presentation, however, the audience cannot, but that will be remedied shortly. And then we will go ahead and get started.
Yeah, and I'm happy to do animations physically with my hands if it keeps everybody entertained. But actually, it's quite simple. I do want to go through this sort of phase by phase. It's a very, very to the point bill. But our amendment that we offered, which Assemblywoman Bill Bray Axelrod has spoken to, has been uploaded into Nellis. I think that resolved some of the technical challenges that some folks had regarding what might have been viewed as non-voluntariness. This is absolutely voluntary every step of the way. Certainly, it would never be the ACLU's position to overshare information with the government. I think that probably goes without saying. But a couple key distinctions that are included here. First, as Assemblywoman Bill Bray Axelrod specified, Section 1 of the bill has an expansive definition of person with a communication impairment. That is to include individuals who have auditory issues, individuals who have challenges with respect to neurodiversity that might preclude or prohibit what might be viewed as otherwise ordinary communication styles that one might have, but also anything else that's going to impair functions from a physical perspective. Because of that, we believe we've had a broader definition than otherwise would have been allotted. The one element I would say that was added here, and a distinction in why we use the verbiage person with a communication impairment, is because NRS 50.050 defines person with a communication disability. This is distinct from that, and the reason why this is distinct and the language is specifically distinct is we did not want to run into or raise issues surrounding other forms of remedies or relief that others might be entitled to when coming up with this very simple solution, as we're addressing it with respect to law enforcement contact effectively with civilians. That effectively deals with individuals who are entitled to interpreters, and we recognize those provisions will still apply, but for purposes of DMV, and to make this as simple as possible, we wanted to make sure that that language was distinct. So that verbiage is included. Another provision comes from, that was struck in Section 1 that is also not included here, is a medical diagnosis or medical requirement. We heard from others. Now, that part of this bill was modeled after a bill that came out of Texas. And there, I know shocking ACLU would submit something that comes out of Texas, but we did in part. However, one of the key distinctions from a practical standpoint that folks aren't aware of is how registration is actually viewed. So if you're pulled over in many other states, everything, all your information, whether that's your NCIS, criminal justice history, your any past warrants you might have, any CCWs you might have, your driver's registration, it's centralized under their version of the Department of Public Safety. We don't have that here. So effectively, when you're pulled over, there's multiple databases that law enforcement might be able to access. One of those becomes your vehicle registration. Obviously, that comes through the DMV here. Another one will be a separate database for NCIS, which might produce other or alternate information. Because that information is not centralized, it's not as easy to streamline things and bring those forward. In Texas, part of the challenge there was as they were offering that bill forward, and the reason why they may have had it was because additional benefits might have been derived by a showing of a medical need to the DMV, or through their version, would become centralized through their version of DPS. Here, that's not the case. It comes to the DMV. So instead of doing that, we've removed that requirement altogether. It would be rather illogical for someone to appear to the DMV and say they have a communication impairment when they in fact have none. I don't know majority of folks, or really any level of folks, that would want to have a flag in the system for a communication impairment without that being present. So that portion is obviously been stricken via our amendment that was submitted. And then the second section of the bill, which is really the operative part, becomes a voluntary disclosure to the DMV with a marker on the identification showing on the driver's license showing communication impairment, and then a note atop the vehicle registration that also says communication impairment. Now, it's important to note why this communication impairment is not specified or broken down, right? Some have asked, why isn't the specific impairment shown? The core concept of this bill is it's supposed to be a flag for officers, that as they're approaching a vehicle, once somebody has been pulled over, and before they approach the vehicle, they recognize I should approach more cautiously. This is the simplest solution to get there without having to overly share additional information that's necessary. The other element that you might have with respect to confidentiality and privacy that exists there is certain individuals may not want their specific, whatever specific impairment they might have, to be shown on an ID or to be shown on a vehicle registration. Finally, we were asked why this isn't on a driver's license or a driver's license plate. And should this be noted on a license plate? We think that creates a series potentially of issues. We don't have any preclusionary language there for this body to consider that in the future, but at this point, there becomes additional risk that's involved with having those types of flags on an actual license plate. With that, we are happy to answer and entertain any questions that might come up. I do know that we have had conversations with the DMV. I'm sure that might be one of the questions from this body. My understanding is that the DMV is in the process of updating their registration system. We don't believe there will be a fiscal note with respect to the ID portion. We do believe there will be potentially a fiscal note with respect to updating the registration. The electronic registration that the DMV shows that law enforcement officers have access to is identical to what's in writing. From our vantage point, we would share that obviously the cost, any cost there would end up being justified because the alternative is taking away human life. I'd also finally mention that the widespread nature of support for this bill has really been outstanding. As Assemblyman Miller had said, the Las Vegas Police Protective Association supports this bill. They've submitted their letter of support. The Managers Association supports this bill. They've submitted their letter of support. We have support from labor groups. I believe Metro will be here to testify in support. Disability rights advocates and those that are advocates for the differently abled have also offered their support. So it's pretty widespread here. This is about as common sense of a solution as we can get here. I know some would like to see this expanded into other areas, including scope, and also potentially include other classes of individuals who might have other communication impairment. But it's important for us to take this first step right now. Without running into other potential barriers, let's get this tool in place. This is, again, I'll reemphasize, if I'm on the same side of an issue as the police unions, we should get a skip one. Just cut right to the front of the line. You should just pass it. But we're happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, and I will remind all members that we do have 20 minutes until our 4 o'clock committees begin. So we'll want to keep everything brief so that we can hear from as many people as possible. Members, any questions for the presenters on this bill? Vice Chair Brown-May.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your presentation and for your thoughtful crafting of this very sensible piece of legislation. I just have a couple of questions. So first, thank you for the pieces and the parts of the community that you did consult with relative to this, right? The whole disability movement in general is nothing about us without us. And so I know that the members of the deaf community were involved in this, in particular in the very beginning, and some members of the autism community. I just wonder if you can touch a little bit on, did you have an opportunity to meet with the Independent Living Council that's through the state of Nevada, or the DD Council, and perhaps get their feedback on any of this? That's question number one. And then question number two is, you talked about this being on the car registration or a driver's license, but I'm curious to know about a state-issued ID. There are a number of members of our community that don't drive, but do have still communication barriers that they experience that use state-issued IDs to present for bus rides and medical appointments, things like that.
Chair Watts, to Assemblywoman Brown May. So with respect to the first question, we have a list of, for the record again, Tar Hasibullah, ACLU of Nevada. We are happy to provide you with the list of those we spoke to. I don't have that list handy, but it's pretty wide. We also spoke to individuals outside of the state. Part of the challenge, and I do want to make this clear for the record, we specifically used the term communication impairment, not to be disparaging, but to cast a wider net. And I have heard from some folks in the community that they didn't prefer the term communication impairment because hearing impairment is a term that's been frowned upon. However, on our end, one of the things that we wanted to do was create the widest level of verbiage possible to incorporate the most amount of people without being specific enough to overly share a condition. So I'm happy to share the list of groups. We can send you that privately to make sure that that feedback's presented. And it's the same within community representing individuals or children who have autism. And so along those, happy to provide that. With respect to the actual identification card and not the driver's license, we're happy to consider that. Part of the goal and onus for this, the very first portion of this, was because we recognized that the interaction during traffic encounters had been the most heightened, which was why vehicle registration ended up playing a role. Many instances, by the time the initial contact has been made, things have went awry. And we've seen that in multiple scenarios. I think when we converse with law enforcement, the very first thing that popped up was misunderstanding, and a lack of knowledge there creates barriers because they're uncertain of whether an individual is being non-compliant or being compliant. Happy to consider that, and certainly not opposed. And if the DMV doesn't have another fiscal note, which I don't believe they would, associated with it, I think that'd be a great potential addition there. Obviously, for us, the biggest thing was the flag atop the registration, because when they start sharing orders from outside of a vehicle, it becomes almost impossible for an individual to comply with that.
Thank you. I believe the Vice Chair has a follow-up. I'm going to ask you guys to take that offline. Assemblywoman Peters.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm hoping that you can help me out with this. But when you're sharing with the DMV that you have some medical disability or issue, does that affect your insurance rate at all, potentially?
No, and part of the reason why is because...
And your name for the record.
I'm sorry, again. For the record, Tar Hasibullah, Executive Director for the ACLU of Nevada. No, it shouldn't. Part of the reason why is because the actual nature of it would be a communication impairment, but without a specific disclosure, and with the amorphous sort of broad language that's utilized here, it would be impossible to state that something is a specific condition there. The specificity portion there, I think, would have potentially done that. For instance, if you had to disclose to the DMV that you were hard of hearing, and that wasn't something you previously disclosed to your health insurance, that might be grounds potentially for an insurance company. I mean, it would be subject to litigation, but grounds for an insurance company to increase potentially a rate or something of that sort. Because this is a broad category here, the category itself is not specifically asked about. So from our vantage point, it would be compliant in that regard.
I was thinking more about car insurance, but...
Yeah, no, it would be the same thing, but there's not a request for information that comes up in the same regard.
Thank you. Any additional questions from members of the committee? Seeing none, thank you all very much for your presentation. With that, we're going to transition to testimony. We'll begin with testimony in support of Assembly Bill 161. Anyone wishing to provide testimony in support, either here in Carson City or in Las Vegas, please come forward. We do not have enough chairs, so take turns. Whenever you're ready, you can begin.
Good afternoon. For the record, my name is Emily Prasad Zamora, EMILYPERSAUD-ZAMORA. And today I'm actually testifying in the most important role that I have is as a mom of an 8-year-old autistic child. I am not gonna cry because I'm not gonna mess up my makeup. But I just wanted to say first and foremost, I'm really, really grateful for this piece of legislation. When you become a parent, there's always that notion of worrying. You worry about your kids all the time. And when you find out that your children are special needs, my son is on the autistic spectrum, and when you find out that they, when you find out that they're special needs, there's that whole different level of worrying that is part of your day-to-day life. A lot of it is how society looks at our children, the judgment that they receive, and also just the overall interactions with governmental agencies. And so I would just say that I'm really appreciative of this. Luckily, I have an 8-year-old and don't have to worry about learning how to drive and all of that yet. But knowing that a piece of legislation like this could be possible will make that worrying about driving a lot easier. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for your personal story and your heartfelt testimony. Next.
Hello, Chair Watts and Vice Chair Brown-May. My name is, sorry, you got me going, girl. Okay. My name is Elise Monroy Marsala, ELYSEMONROY-MARSALA. I'm here today on behalf of my family. Thank you, Assemblyman Miller, for bringing this important bill forward. This bill will help people with communication barriers or people who don't communicate in a typical way, like my stepson, Rudy. We understand this bill is being amended to replace much of the original language, and our family is in full support of the new amended language. Additionally, we would support the proposed amendment from Stephen Cohen specific to training for law enforcement. Our family believes that autistic people should be able to have the same expectation of participation in the legislative and policy development process as neurotypical people. Autism is often thought of as a child's disease or affliction. Autistic children grow up to be autistic adults, so ensuring that our state enacts laws and policies to help people of all abilities live in our communities safely and inclusively is very important. Our initial concerns, and we met with the bill sponsor, we had a great meeting with the bill sponsor actually. Our concerns were specifically initially related to the medical diagnosis information, so we're really glad to see that information has been removed. Autistic adults should have the same voice and agency as neurotypical people as it relates to how they navigate the world, even if that voice is not auditory. Thank you for hearing my testimony, and the Marsala Hawkins family urges your support of AB 161, and I will be submitting a letter signed by my family. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Sir?
Good afternoon, Chair. Jason Walker, JASONWALKER, speaking on behalf of the Washoe County Sheriff's Office and Nevada Sheriffs and Chiefs Association. Full support for this. Any piece of information that we can get to help us bridge any communication gap is helpful for us. Support.
Thank you very much. Next.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Christine Saunders, and I'm the Policy Director with the Progressive Leadership Alliance of Nevada. In order to let as many people talk, I'm just going to say we support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Brevity is the soul of wit. We love this bill. Just want to briefly put out, we have members that this issue is near and dear to their heart, that being autism. Met with the committee sponsor on this bill, or excuse me, the bill sponsor, pardon me, had a minor suggested additional language. I think the omnibus amendment captures that, so we just urge the committee support and thank both Assemblywoman Bilberry Axelrod and then obviously Assemblyman Miller for bringing it forward. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony.
Chair Watts, Chris Reese, RIES, representing the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. To be brief, I would just echo my partners up in Washoe County, and we support this bill.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee and staff. Rick McCann, Nevada Association of Public Safety Officers, and a member of the Nevada Law Enforcement Coalition. What a concept. You're going to give cops more opportunities to avoid bad encounters. You're going to give them an opportunity to know more about the people they're about to encounter. Where the hell has this bill been? I've been sitting on my rear end doing nothing about it. This is a great bill. It is a genius bill, and I'm going to give credit where credit's due. We fully support AB 161 and its amendments, and I would offer, as apparently it has been considered, putting it into scope as well. Down in Metro and whatnot, it's a vital resource for them when they take a look at arrests and convictions of people they encounter. Having it right there as one of the first elements or the resources that Metro looks at would be really kind of cool. So I think this is a fantastic bill. We support it. Let's expand it to scope, and we'll be happy. Thank you.
Thank you for your candor and for your testimony. Next.
For the record, my name is Annette Magnus, Executive Director of Battleborn Progress. We are in full support of this bill, and I just want to say I have a nephew that has autism, and I hope you pass this for him.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, Committee Chair. Todd Inglesby, President of Professional Firefighters Nevada. We definitely support this bill, support our partners that we work with, and keep this community safe with every day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Inglesby.
Good afternoon, Chair, Committee. My name is Erica Roth, ERICA-ROTH, on behalf of the Washoe County Public Defender's Office. I echo the sentiments of all those who went before me. I'll just note that police officers are trained that traffic encounters are one of the most dangerous situations that they will be in. And so it's important to ensure that they have all the tools that they need to avoid any miscommunications. We support this bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
John Pirro from the Clark County Public Defender's Office. We thank the sponsor for bringing this forward. I'm familiar with the case that Assemblyman Miller spoke with, and it's rather unfortunate that an innocent young man had to spend time in custody, get handcuffed, transported to the police station, not understanding what was going on, all because of the information wasn't available to officers. This will prevent situations like that in the future, and we're grateful for the sponsor bringing it forward.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Good afternoon, Chair Watts, members of the committee. David Clyde here on behalf of the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada. We're in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clyde. Next.
Thank you, Chairman Watts and members of the committee. My name is Eric Cheng, ERICJENG, Acting Executive Director for One API Nevada. Ditto to all the sentiments. We are fully in support of this bill and looking forward to translate this bill to our community for the outreach. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Seeing no one else wishing to provide testimony and support here in Carson City, we'll move down to Las Vegas. Whoever wishes to begin first, turn on your microphone, state your name for the record, you may proceed.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello, my name is Anwar Alums, ANWAR-ALLUMS, and I am the person that the case that Mr. Miller was talking about. And I support this bill. The fact that this happened to me and I don't know what I could have done differently. I get nervous now just even talking about it. And if this could have been avoided, I think my life would have been better. Sometimes I feel like my future has been cut short. And knowing that, that it's just hard sometimes. So just being able to know that this is in the bill and have it signed and be able to have this be avoided for anybody else. Sometimes I'm glad it was me, because if not me, then who else? And it's nice to have people around me that are able to put power to stop things like this. So all that to say, I'm in support of this bill. Thank you for allowing me to talk.
Thank you, Mr. Allen, for sharing your story with us. And I think I can speak on behalf of the committee in saying that we're sorry for the experience that you went through, but we appreciate you're sharing it in helping create a better policy for this state. We'll go on to the next person wishing to provide testimony in Las Vegas.
This is Aisha Goins, Aesha, last name Goins, and I am in support of this bill as a mother and as the vice president of the NAACP. It is my son that was accosted. It is my son that is on the spectrum. It is my son that had to go through this and was shackled and taken to jail. It is me who did not know where her son was for 24 hours. It is me that has taught her son to tell them that he has severe anxiety disorder and to please pay attention. So I couldn't understand why my well-mannered, soft-spoken, and loving son could be shackled and taken to jail. He's so well-mannered that the police noted in the police report. However, they thought my son was driving impaired because he didn't respond as quickly as others. My son is a highly functional young man on the spectrum. He suffers from high anxiety disorders induced by stress. Anxiety shows up a little different in people with the spectrum. When my son's anxiety, when he gets anxious, he shuts down. All people, no matter the impairment, should have the opportunity to be treated with respect and dignity, and I urge the committee to please pass this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Goins, and we are listening today. Next person wishing to provide testimony.
Ricky Gourrier, R-I-C-K-Y, G-O-U-R-R-I-E-R, with Tri-Strategies. Here today on behalf of Opportunity Village. We are in full support of this legislation for reasons that I already stated. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. If anyone else wishes to provide testimony in person, please come forward. Meanwhile, BPS, can we see if we have anyone wishing to provide testimony in support of AB 161 by phone?
Yes, Chair. If you'd like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Stephen Cohen. For the record, I'll keep it nice and short and sweet. Ditto. Thank you, and I yield.
Thank you very much for your brief remarks, Mr. Cohen. We appreciate it. Next caller, please.
Wiz Rizard, W-I-Z-R-O-U-Z-A-R-D, with American for Prosperity, Deputy State Director. Just want to applaud the bill sponsor for bringing this forward. This is an amazing bill. I echo exactly what everyone have shared. Heart go out to those parents that have dealt with those situations. It's unfortunate, but I applaud the sponsor for taking a step in the right direction with this bill to ensure no other Nevadan have to experience that. And I appreciate that this remains voluntary. There are those who do deal with these issues, but don't want it publicly. And if there is an option to ensure that still it's able to be voluntarily provided in the system, but not on a license that can get lost and be shared publicly, that would be great. But overall, thank you so much for bringing this forward. And on behalf of American for Prosperity Nevada, you have our support. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your testimony with us. BPS, next caller, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Hoffman, representing Nevada Attorneys for Criminal Justice. We are in support of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Richard Hodgson, HODGSON, from Officer SEIU 1107, and we are also in full support of AB 161.
Thank you very much for providing your supportive testimony. BPS, next caller, please.
Good afternoon, Chair. This is Dora Martinez with the Nevada Disability Peer Action Coalition, and we support this bill. And thank you so much for the sponsor. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for your comments. BPS, next caller, please.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller, you're unmuted and may begin.
Good afternoon. My name is Brittany Bass, and I am the founder of the Amuse Foundation, advocating maintaining unity with special needs in everyone. My colleagues and I are writing in express of our support for Assembly Bill 161. Amuse is a 501c3 certified nonprofit organization out of Huntington Beach, California, with a mission of advocating, connecting, and educating training first responders in our community about autism spectrum disorder, along with other intellectual and developmental disabilities, and the possible scenarios that may occur when interacting with someone on the spectrum or with an invisible disability. Please visit our website at amusefoundation.org. In short, AB 161 will save lives. The latest estimates suggest that about 1 out of every 68 children, or 1.5% in the U.S., have autism spectrum disorder. It is a complex neurological and developmental disorder that affects how a person acts, communicates, learns, and interacts with others. 50% of those with ASD will elope or flee when confronted. A recent 18-month study of 284 Ontario adolescents and adults with autism found that 19% of police interactions, physical restraints were used. In 30% of the cases, the person was escorted to an emergency department. Only 2 of the interactions resulted in criminal charges. What happens when people with autism interact with police? Children and adults with disabilities will have integration with police. AB 161 will provide a clear and concise way of informing first responders what they need and more tools for their belt to proceed with communication support in assessing for the dangerousness and prioritizing each situation. The voluntary license plate DMV state registry would allow for medical information to be displayed through a law enforcement information system, informing parties who have access necessary information about the registered individual, which will provide tools to proceed in an educated manner. These are forms of proactive de-escalation and preventative measures for unforeseen emergent scenarios. It could be the driver registered as a nonverbal or person with autism, or a minor known to ride in that vehicle. Providing scenarios such as lack of communication ability, examples of possible aggression, such as my son, 8 years old, and information for how an officer might proceed to interject, while also providing a form of autonomy for high-functioning autistic adults. Additionally, the Prolo 2 communication app would be a great
Thank you.
tool
If you could begin to wrap up your remarks, please.
Yes. If approved, this bill will help reduce the likelihood of harmful encounters between individuals with communication impairment and law enforcement, primarily during traffic encounters, by creating a system where individuals can voluntarily advise the DMC. Amuse for Autism, Amuse Foundation
Thank
is
you,
in full
ma'am.
support of Bill 161.
You've gone over
Thank you.
your 2-minute limit. Please, if you haven't already, submit your comments in writing, and we'll make sure to include those in the record. BPS, next caller, please.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support of Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now.
Hello?
You may begin.
Yes, hello. My name is Gerald Mays, and I represent the Veterans Affairs Chair for the NAACP. And I am in support of AB 161 for a multiple of reasons. A, as a veteran and a father myself in this city with some issues with communication as it pertains to my 100% PTSD, it would be very imperative for people like me to be able to have the protection to get the benefit of the doubt prior to. So it would be very important for me and my family to be able to have the support for communication issues to be considered prior to any issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Next caller, please.
Chair, there are no other callers choosing to testify in support at this time.
Thank you. We'll move on to testimony in opposition of Assembly Bill 161. Seeing no one currently coming in Carson City or Las Vegas, BPS, do we have anyone wishing to provide testimony in opposition by phone?
Callers, if you would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in opposition to Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now. Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify in opposition at this time.
Thank you, and now we'll move on to testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 161. Mr. Sever, welcome. Anyone else wishing to provide testimony, please come forward.
Thank you, Chair and committee members. Sean Sever from the Nevada DMV. We are neutral on AB 161 and did provide a no impact fiscal note on the original bill. Implementing this on our current driver's license is not a big impact to the DMV because we already have this in place with the specific conditions, namely autism and hard of hearing, that are already offered on the driver's license. If we want to add this to the registration or make changes to our driver's license medical coding, that would result in a pretty large impact to the DMV. The DMV, as you know, is going through a transformation right now to move most of our services online. We are between IT systems at the moment and are hoping not to make big changes to our old system. When we make a change, something basically breaks later. Our estimated fiscal note to include the registration changes would be pretty high. It would be a pretty large change to our system, and we haven't even spoken with our vendor yet about their costs, our kiosk vendor. One idea we had to would be to implement the driver's license portion on July 1st, 2023, and then the registration and medical coding portions when the DMV transformation is complete. We did propose this to the bill sponsors and appreciated meeting with them. And we totally understand the intent of the bill and are happy to work with the bill sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sever. Anyone else wishing to provide testimony in neutral on Assembly Bill 161? Seeing none in Carson City or Las Vegas, BPS, do we have anyone wishing to provide neutral testimony by phone?
Callers, if you would like to provide neutral testimony on Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue.
Good afternoon. Oh, are we there? Okay. Good afternoon.
You may begin, sorry.
Good afternoon, Assembly. My name is Anna Binder, ANNABINDER. I am here individually, but I am a member of the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. I'm also a member of the Governor's Commission on Autism Spectrum Disorder and the Vice Chair of our Special Education Advisory Committee. Although I appreciate and I fully believe with all my heart that the intentions of AB 161 are being brought forward for the betterment of everyone involved, the lack of any of our committees having been discussed with this and kind of seeing a huge lack of feedback from our special ability citizens is kind of disheartening to me. So I hope that in a future one that the bill sponsor and ACLU can bring more of us to the table to see how really, making this happen would, be warranted or wanted in the community. We fight really hard to be included without labels. And it's, kind of hard sometimes. I myself am autistic. I have handicap plates. And the battles sometimes that I have to have in a parking lot over me using my handicap plates can sometimes cause a lot of friction. So I look forward to having some more coordinated conversations. And again, I do believe this is very well intended, but I'm just wondering how much more of our citizens are really supportive of this. But we do need to do something. So I thank everyone for the conversation today in this bill. Thank you.
Thank you. And you can find Assemblyman Miller's contact information on the legislative website. I would encourage you to reach out and to be included in the conversation moving forward. BPS, next caller, please.
Hi there. Good afternoon, Chair and fellow committee members. I'm the Executive Director of the Nevada Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. My name is Catherine Nielsen, CATHERINE-NIELSEN for the record. Thank you for allowing me to make a short comment today. We echo many of the comments that were stated here today, though we take a neutral position on the bill. Ms. Binder was correct. We have not heard from the bill sponsor as Vice Chair Brown May has asked. So we would encourage having a conversation with the bill sponsor as well. And I'm glad to hear the mother who mentioned disclosing medical diagnoses on their license. This could cause an unintentional backlash to the individual that is trying to communicate or receive services of some sort. Imagine an individual with autism going to a nightclub or trying to purchase an age-restricted item. Many businesses do have the right to deny access or deny the right to serve that individual. And we do believe that disclosing medical conditions is, the right of the individual, and protecting that is also the right of the individual. So we just want to ensure that that is taken into consideration when discussing this bill. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. I'll just take a moment of personal privilege to note that it is difficult sometimes when bringing a policy forward for legislators to identify all of the stakeholders. So we appreciate you finding out about this measure and coming forward. And again, I encourage you to make sure that you connect with the bill sponsors to be included in the conversation moving forward. BPS, next caller, please.
If you have recently joined and would like to testify in neutral for Assembly Bill 161, please press star 9 now. Chair, there are no callers choosing to testify in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblyman, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Assemblyman Cameron C.H. Miller, for the record. Just real quickly want to thank everyone for their comments today, for your time, and acknowledge that anyone who feels that they were left out of the conversation, I want them to know that my phone is available and my door is open to please reach out. If there is more work that we need to do on this bill, I am open to doing that. With that being said, I thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, I'll close the hearing on Assembly Bill 161. That brings us to the last item on our agenda today, which is public comment. Again, we'll ask anyone wishing to provide public comment to limit their remarks to 2 minutes. With that, we'll see if we have anyone wishing to provide public comment either here in Carson City or down in Las Vegas. Seeing none at this time, BPS, can we check one more time to see if we have anyone on the phone wishing to provide public comment?
If you would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you are wishing to provide public comment, please press star 9 now. One moment, Chair.
Hi there. Committee, one last comment from me, Catherine Nielsen, Executive Director from the Governor's Council on Developmental Disabilities. March 8th is Developmental Disabilities Awareness Day at the legislature. So if you guys are around or would like to be involved in that, we do encourage you to come into room 3100. Assemblywoman Brown May is also in support of that day as well. So if you have any additional questions, I'm sure she can answer them for you, or our office can. We just encourage you to be there for that day, especially with the content of the discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. BPS, next caller, please.
One moment, Chair.
Good afternoon. My name is Cyrus Hojadi. Really great things to learn in the last several hours. I wanted to just talk about in general in transportation, the environment, because we had presentations earlier. I would like you guys to all look into personal rapid transit. And I have somebody I know who lives in the San Francisco Bay Area. He's trying to promote this technology because he believes that there is a climate crisis. He believes it's more efficient than other mass transit systems. It's far less costly to build, but for some reason, the California legislature is not on board. This is a serious concern considering we've got high gas prices. And by the way, one of the reasons why it's so high here is because a lot of it comes from Nevada. And I'd like to know, you guys, what is causing from the mass inflation, were the supply chains worth it? I promoted this technology heavily to the Regional Transportation Commission back in 2016. I believe this will really compete with the car. But in order to get transit to work, because I heard earlier somebody talk about sprawl, and I believe this is the number one problem living here in Las Vegas. This area has the worst urban planning perhaps in the world. And this system is largely caused by codes and regulations, parking minimums, zoning, standards for arterials and collectors, a lot of different things that causes this system. So what we need to do is we need to rethink these policies. I know some states have intervened over this, and if we can make these areas pedestrian friendly, where we can give developers the freedom to build, then we can make transit work, and we can really evolve into the 21st century. And I just think to myself, like, if we have all these environmental concerns, we still have no transit system reliable.
Thank you, Mr. Hajati. Your time is up. Thank you for providing your comments to us today. BPS, can we move on to the next caller?
If you have recently joined and would like to provide public comment, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no other callers choosing to participate at this time.
Thank you. Thanks to all the members for sticking with us through the agenda today. I know it was quite robust. Our next meeting will be on Tuesday, February 28th at 1:30 p.m. We are adjourned.